Chapter 905. Behind the curtain, the hierarch remained silent. His broken hand had been healed by Hao Yin, but Ning Kei's shoulder, which was injured by the primordial 13 arrows, was not healed. Just as he told He Ming-chi, there were many things that were hard to understand in the divine halls of West Hill, including the recent silence of the divine hall of judgment. At the right to light, Yi Hongyu, the great divine priest of judgment, had been questioned by many, especially the descendants of the great divine priest of light who had returned from the South Sea. But she was of high status. Even though he was the hierarch of the divine hall, he could not punish her without any evidence. But He Ming-chi's words made him even more vigilant, because of some things that happened many years ago, and also because He Ming-chi said that she occasionally looked at the divine hall of light from afar. The divine hall of light was on Peach Mountain and could be seen at any time. Yi Hongyu was the great divine priest of judgment. In the past, she could even walk to the front of the divine hall of light and observe it carefully, let alone look at it from afar. But the divine hall of light was not what it used to be. Since the peach blossoms all over the mountain were revived in spring and the eternal lamp was extinguished, the divine hall of light had become a forbidden place on Peach Mountain. It seemed to be isolated from the world, and no one dared to peep at it. Since Hao Yin had performed miracles several times during the Right to Light, the believer's guess had become the truth. Naturally, no one dared to disrespect the divine hall of light. No one dared to talk about who lived in the divine hall of light, let alone peep at it. Even guessing became a taboo. The divine priests of the South Sea were temporarily arranged to live in the divine hall of revelation. Zhao Nanhai and the others had returned to Peach Mountain to fight for power with the hierarch. But now they dare not do anything. They prayed to the divine hall of light every day, hoping that they could see the face of God. Under such circumstances, Yi Hongyu looked at the divine hall of light from afar, which was puzzling and alarming. What was she looking at? Did she dare to peep at the person in the divine hall of light? In the depths of the divine hall of judgment, Yi Hongyu sat silently on the black jade throne. Her beautiful face was devoid of any emotion. She was so cold and indifferent. She had spent most of her time on the throne and did not respond to her subordinates' reports. It was as if she had lost the ability to think. The reason for this was that she had been thinking about a certain scene. During the Right to Light, Ning Kei had destroyed the hierarch's sacred chariot with one arrow. The short and skinny old Taoist had looked so ridiculous. Because of that image, she had been tossing and turning these days, unable to sleep peacefully. Her mind was full of thoughts, and she could not calm down. Just as He Ming-chi said, her mood was naturally not good. As for the fact that she would occasionally look towards the divine hall of light, it was because the news of Ning Kei being locked up in the U prison could not be hidden from her, the great divine priest of judgment. She really wanted to know how that person in the divine hall would deal with Ning Kei, and this would affect her thoughts on a certain matter. Just like Peach Mountain, the atmosphere in the entire West Hill Divine Kingdom was tense. Because of the Academy, the Right to Light did not go smoothly. The sacrifices escaped, and the West Hill Divine Palace suffered heavy casualties. Because of Liu Bai's death, the Sword Garret officially broke off relations with Taoism. In the end, it ended hastily or even miserably. Many of the prepared ceremonies were not held. But many people did not leave the West Hill Divine Kingdom. The emperors from various countries kowtowed devoutly at the front yard of Peach Mountain and then left reluctantly. But the diplomatic corps stayed, as well as the dancers and musicians who were supposed to participate in the ceremony, and tens of thousands of believers. Hao Yin was in the human world, and he might be in the West Hill Divine Palace. Under such circumstances, how could those devout believers leave the West Hill Divine Kingdom? They could not be moved even if they were stabbed with knives and axes. Therefore, the front yard of Peach Mountain and the surrounding villages were still filled with people, but no one dared to make a ruckus. The Tang Empire did not send any diplomatic corps to the Right to Light. The ones who came to the West Hill Divine Kingdom were the House of Red Sleeves, which had no official status. In fact, if the West Hill Divine Palace had not insisted on including this clause in the treaty, the Tang Imperial Court would not have even sent the House of Red Sleeves. because everyone knew that the Tangs would not be treated well here. The House of Red Sleeves was scheduled to perform after the rite to light. But Chun Pippi was rescued by the Academy, so the celebration could not continue. After that, they prepared to leave Peach Mountain, but were forced to stay by the West Hill Divine Palace. This was a war between the Tang Empire and the West Hill. The Academy had disrupted the rite to light, but they were forced to stay. This was a depressing and dangerous matter. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves lived in a small town in front of the mountain. Their house was ordinary, and there were many cavalrymen of the Divine Halls guarding outside. The girls were naturally afraid that misfortune would befall them at any time. The leader of the House of Red Sleeves was Xiao Qiao. She used to be a childish and adorable girl, but now she had matured. Although she was still young, she already had the demeanor of a great general. When the Divine Hall revealed their intention of not allowing them to return to Chong, and she immediately sent the news back to Chong and through relevant channels. Just the day before yesterday, the negotiation document from the Imperial Court of the Tang Empire had arrived. That was why the West Hill Divine Palace did not do anything to the House of Red Sleeves. But Xiao Qiao knew that the letter from the Imperial Court could only temporarily alleviate the current situation. It could not really bring the girls of the House of Red Sleeves back to Chang'an. If they continued to stay in such a hostile and dangerous environment, she was worried that the girls, who were on the verge of a nervous breakdown, could only hold on for a few more days. Your Excellency, I want a definite answer. Xiao Qiao looked at the West Hill Divine Priest in front of her and said calmly and firmly, "If the Divine Halls do not allow us to leave the West Hill, I need a reason, and so does the Tang Imperial Court." The West Hill Divine Priest squinted at her and said, "Are you threatening the Divine Halls?" Xiao Qiao slightly lowered her head and said, "I dare not. But the Divine Halls also have to be reasonable." The West Hill Divine Priest sneered and thought that the Divine Halls had lost face because of the Tangs who made the right to light end up like this. "How dare you ask the Divine Halls to be reasonable? I said a few days ago that since you were here to dance, how can you leave?" Xiao Qiao said, "If you want to see the dance, we could do it any time." "When?" The Divine Priest frowned and said unhappily, "It is a great honor for the Divine Halls to ask you to dance. Just wait patiently for the order. Why do you have so many questions? Be careful that you will be punished for being disrespectful." Xiao Cao's chest rose and fell slightly. She suppressed her anger and said, "Even the dance needs time to prepare. Please tell us the date, Your Excellency." The Divine Priest said indifferently, "I don't know." Xiao Qiao asked, "Then who knows?" The Divine Priest looked at her and said mockingly, "I don't know either." Xiao Qiao said calmly, "I want to see the Hierarch Lord. I think he must know." "Who are you going to see the Hierarch Lord?" The Divine Priest scolded. Xiao Qiao remained calm and said, "Then I want to see the great Divine Priest of Judgment." The Divine Priest looked at Xiao Qiao and said mockingly, "Even now, you stubborn Tangs still refuse to accept the reality? Let me tell you, unless you die, you will never cross this threshold again." The Tang Imperial Court's document failed to persuade the West Hill Divine Halls to let the House of Red Sleeves go back to Chang'an. From that moment on, Xiao Qiao knew that the ending that awaited her and the girls would be extremely miserable. Even if the Imperial Court was willing to start another war with the West Hill Divine Halls for these ordinary girls, they would not be able to change the fact that they would die. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves also understood this, but no one had ever mentioned it. They always held on to the slightest hope. Until the Divine Priest pointed out, Xiao Cao's expression became gloomy. Faint sobbing sounds came from the house behind the courtyard. The West Hill Divine Priest was very satisfied with the sobbing sounds. When he was about to say something to make the Tang girls more miserable, the courtyard door was suddenly pushed open. He turned to the West Hill Divine Guards and asked, "What's the matter?" One of the West Hill Divine Guards said, "A lord wants to see the girls of the House of Red Sleeves." The Divine Priest frowned unhappily and said coldly, "Which hall is the lord from?" "I am ordered by the Hierarch Lord to look after these Tang girls personally. No one is allowed to see them." The West Hill Divine Guard scolded, "Who are you? How dare you inquire about such things?" Hearing this, Xiao Qiao could not help but feel relieved. but she was even more curious and vigilant. Who dared to ignore the hierarch's order? Could it be the great divine priest of judgment who was acquainted with Ning Ke? The divine priest trembled with anger. He looked at the crowd and scolded. How dare you look down on the hierarch, Lord? Do you want to die? Who dares to stop the people the divine hall of light wants to see? A very young voice sounded. The West Hill divine guards separated and revealed a girl in white. The divine priest looked at the girl in white and suddenly remembered something. He suddenly felt that all the strength in his body had been sucked out. He collapsed on the ground and could no longer get up. The girl in white did not even look at the divine priest. She walked to the courtyard and looked at the girls who came out of the houses. She frowned slightly and asked, "Who is Xiao Qiao?" Xiao Qiao took a deep breath and took a step forward. She said respectfully, "Yes, I am," before the right to light. The people of the House of Red Sleeves were placed under house arrest in this shabby house. She did not know what had happened these days. She did not know what the Divine Hall of Light meant to Haotian Taoism. She did not know the background of the girl in white. But based on the reaction of the divine priest, she knew that the girl in white must have an important position in the West Hill Divine Palace. So no matter what happened next, she had to seize the opportunity. The girl in white looked at Xiao Qiao and did not understand why her master specially summoned this Tang girl. Until now, no one could enter the Divine Hall of Light, not even the hierarch. Xiao Qiao followed the girl into the horse carriage and left the town. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves rushed to the gate and watched the horse carriage gradually disappear. They were full of worry and did not know what Xiao Qiao would encounter in the Divine Hall of Light. It was not until then that the divine priest of West Hill woke up from his extreme fear. He left the courtyard in a daze and committed suicide that night. 3 small things determine the world. Everything has been good recently, but I can't stand the heat in Hubei. After living in the Northeast for a few years, I really can't get used to it. The book review competition will be awarded on the 1st of June. I will return to the Northeast before that day. The coolness is waiting for me. I will work very hard in June. I guarantee 200,000 yuan, but I still won't ask for any tickets. This is to make up for this month. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 906. After spring, no one had entered the Divine Hall of Light, including the Hierarch Lord. Therefore, when the respectful divine priests and deacons saw Xiao Qiao being brought into the divine hall by the girl in white, they could not help showing a shocked expression. They could not understand what they were seeing. Xiao Qiao herself did not understand what had happened to her. She knew that the Divine Hall of Light had not had a master for many years. So who wanted to see her? After the girl in white led her into the Divine Hall, she quietly left. Looking at the empty and magnificent Divine Hall, she felt so small and subconsciously knelt on the soft cushion. There was a curtain in the depths of the Divine Hall. Behind the curtain, there was no shadow or sound. It was so quiet that it was frightening. She lowered her head and anxiously waited for her ending. Time passed slowly. She did not know how long she had been kneeling and waiting. Her knees were already sore, but she did not dare to stand up. She became more and more nervous. Suddenly, she saw a big black horse. Xiao Cao's eyes revealed a happy expression because she recognized the big black horse and knew it was Ning Ke's mount. She was about to greet the black horse when she thought of another thing. She used to have a good friend in Chang'an. That friend was about the same age as her. She was dark and thin. They used to give each other many small gifts. She taught her friend how to put on makeup and how to seduce the lecherous master of her house. Later, her good friend encountered many things and became a young lady of the Grand Secretary's family. It was said that she even became the successor of the great divine priest of light. But when they met occasionally, she was still the same person. Xiao Qiao was extremely shocked and confused. She covered her chest and sat on the soft cushion. She could not believe her own inference. However, she knew that there could be no other explanation. The wind gradually rose in the Divine Hall of Light and lifted a corner of the curtain. But she did not see any old friend. She only vaguely saw a very tall girl standing on a balcony. Was it Sang Sang? Xiao Qiao stood up and looked at the figure. She wanted to call her, but did not dare to. No matter whether she was the master of the Divine Hall of Light or some other bigwig in the West Hill Divine Palace, she was no longer the inconspicuous friend of the past. I grant you immortality. An extremely majestic voice reverberated in the Light Palace. Xiao Qiao didn't know if the voice came from the figure on the balcony or not. She stared blankly at the curtain that divided the world into two halves and slightly clenched her fists, which were hanging by the side of her skirt. The girl in white who had disappeared earlier reappeared and brought her out of the Light Palace. After entering the Divine Hall of Light, Xiao Qiao didn't do anything. She didn't encounter any torture, didn't see any old friends, and didn't kowtow to Hao Yan. She just left. Everything seemed to be for her to hear those words. I grant you eternal life. Xiao Qiao left the Divine Hall of Light and returned to the small town. The girls of the House of Red Sleeves anxiously inquired about what had happened. Before she could say anything, the Divine Hall had sent dozens of cavalrymen to escort the House of Red Sleeves out of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and even to the south of the Verdant Canyon. After returning to Chang, and Xiao Qiao still felt that this trip to the West Hill was like a dream, especially the time when she waited in the Divine Hall of Light. It was really like a dream, without any elements of reality. It was not until many years later that she realized what the divine gift meant. On the Peach Mountain, the Hao Yan Divine Hall, where the hierarch resided, had always been the highest. But now, in the eyes of the people, the quiet Divine Hall of Light was truly unattainable. No one dared to go against the will of the Divine Hall of Light, not even the hierarch. However, since the beginning of spring, the Divine Hall of Light had been silent until recently, when it issued several orders. The first order of the Divine Hall of Light was to escort the House of Red Sleeves back to Chang. This order puzzled the people in the Divine Hall, but in the eyes of the hierarch and other insiders, the reason was simple. When Hao Yan was recuperating in the mortal world, he had received some favors from mortals. This was just to return the favor. However, the second order of the Divine Hall of Light shocked the hierarch. The girl in white expressionlessly asked the Divine Hall to immediately stop the pursuit of Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang. During the Right to Light, Tang Xiaodang broke into the Peach Mountain and escaped with Chun Pippi, which was a great humiliation to the Divine Hall of West Hill. Naturally, they had to pay a heavy price. After that, the powerhouses of the Divine Hall went out to search everywhere. They even set up many traps on the road from Qinghe Prefecture to Chang'an. The hierarch firmly believed that under the pressure of the drunkard and the butcher, the real powerhouses of the back of the mountain of the academy dared not do anything. Then Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang would be caught by the Divine Hall sooner or later, and then they would be executed. At this time, the girl in white asked the Divine Hall to immediately stop the search. Why did Hao Yan do that? The hierarch was a little confused, but he dared not to question it. For the Divine Hall of West Hill, the House of Red Sleeves left unscathed. Although it was infuriating, it was still a trivial matter. Stopping the pursuit of Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang was the real important matter. For Sang Sang, these were all trivial matters, because for Hao Yan, everything in the human world was trivial. Her decision had nothing to do with human emotions, but was based on heaven's plan. The purpose of the Right to Light was to reopen the gate of Hao Yan's divine kingdom, and at the same time, cut off her mortal bond. That was why she asked Chun Pippi to be the sacrifice and asked the Tang Empire to send the House of Red Sleeves to the divine kingdom of West Hill. In her original plan, after the raging sacred fire, Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang would die, and Xiao Qiao would also die. Then, most of her mortal ties with the human world would be severed. Unfortunately, Ning Ke appeared. He proved to her through the Grand Tianqi that mortal bond could not be cut off. Therefore, after thinking about it, she decided to change the solution. If mortal bond was love, then she would repay it with her life. She gave Xiao Qiao immortality and gave Chun Pippi and Tang Xiaodang another life. She thought that she could cut off the bond between herself and the human world. Ning Ke did not know about these things. Just as Mingxi said that day, he could only see the falling leaves and rain clouds outside the stone window, but he could not stand the rain. He was now the most important prisoner of the U prison, but he did not care. If he had not come to Peach Mountain, he would still be a prisoner in Chang'an. He would be in prison anyway, so it did not matter where he was imprisoned. What he cared about was the battle between him and Sang Sang. He lay on the stone bed and continued to dream. Erotic dreams, terrifying dreams. He fought with the woman who was sometimes plump and sometimes skinny, enjoying the extreme pain and pleasure of life. He often kissed her and occasionally bit her, feeling her soft and smooth skin, feeling the pain of being cut into pieces. She was in the divine hall of light on the peak, and he was in the cold stone room on the precipice. They loved and hated each other, separated by thousands of feet. He let her feel the most wonderful feeling in the human world, and she let him feel the most painful feeling in the human world. She kept killing him, and he kept loving her. It was all torture. This was a battle between heaven and man, and also a battle between a man and a woman. These two battles had happened countless times in history, but now they had merged into one. This battle was very ordinary, just like the simplest family drama. It was just a matter of who was at the top and who was at the bottom, who wanted to change positions and who didn't. In the end, there would always be one side who would emerge victorious, and then their voices would be louder in the family. But this battle was not ordinary, because it was not about who was the master of the old brush pen shop, but the outcome of the battle between Hao Yin and mankind and the final direction of the world. Sometimes when Ning Ke thought about the fate of the world decided by the life of a married couple, he would inevitably feel that it was ridiculous, but he also could not hide his pride and complacency. The battle in the dream continued. He did not know how long it had been in the cell. The autumn leaves outside the stone window became fewer and fewer until it started to snow. He did not know that it was winter. No one surrendered, and there was no victory or defeat. Ninkei looked at the falling snowflakes outside the stone window and thought of how the frequency of torture had gradually decreased these days. He frowned slightly, trying to guess what had happened. He did not know what was happening outside, but he was sure that old Master Chui had been killed by him. He knew that there were people in the small town where the drunkard and the butcher were, but he did not know that they were his old friends. He knew that the Tang Empire and the Academy had made preparations, and Qinghe County would soon face the wrath of revenge. But all of this was on the premise that he could defeat Sang Sang. If heaven had feelings, heaven would age easily. If Sang Sang had feelings, he could win. But now he could not see any possibility, nor could he find a way to break the stalemate. What confused or alarmed him the most was that Sang Sang should not be able to find any way to break away from the mortal world. But why did she seem so calm and confident in the dream? Another small incident happened in the Divine Hall of Light. Two girls in white were kneeling behind Sang Sang, looking extremely nervous and sad, especially the one on the left, who was gradually opening her eyes, crying in fear. On a wooden plate not far away, there was a pair of white underwear, stained with blood. It turned out that the girl in white had her first menstruation. They were selected by the Divine Hall from over 100,000 girls in the West Hill Divine Kingdom. They were required to be fair and clean, free from the filth of the world. They knew this very well. Their experience in the Divine Hall of Light over the past 6 months made them realize how great the saintess they served was. They were proud and more devout because of this. However, their first menstruation finally came. They knew what was waiting for them, but they did not dare to hide it. So they knelt behind Sang Sang, crying and waiting for Hao Yin's punishment. Sang Sang did not punish them. She looked at the looming bright moon in the night sky and said, "The human world has begun to call this menstruation. I don't know if you'll find it interesting or annoying." Light snow was drifting on the terrace. She frowned slightly and looked at a precipice in the wind and snow. Her right hand slowly fell on her lower abdomen. A dam of 1,000 miles was made of baskets of soil. A city of 1,000 years was made of black bricks. No matter how big the event was, it was actually made up of extremely small things. 3 small things happened in her world. These 3 small things led to one result. She decided to release someone. I wish you all a happy weekend. There will be updates on Saturday tomorrow. There will be no Saturdays in the future. Please be informed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 907. Ning Kei's gaze passed through the stone window and fell on the snow on the opposite cliff. He was a little confused, not because of the sadness of being imprisoned in the stone room, but because he was actually in the mood to look at the snow. He hadn't dreamed for 2 days, which meant that he hadn't been ravaged for 2 days. Under such circumstances, he naturally wouldn't be stupid enough to continue fantasizing about her. He couldn't help but feel a little startled when this strange and tragic battle was suddenly called off. Then, he became vigilant. Steady footsteps sounded on the mountain path of the U prison. 2 deacons in black from the judicial department came to the fence expressionlessly and took out 2 keys to open the complicated twin lock. Ning Kei looked at the pushed fence and the road in front of him. He raised his eyebrows and asked the 2 deacons in black, "Are you going to kill me or let me go?" The deacons in black were obviously under strict orders. They acted as if they did not hear him and naturally did not answer his question. They held his arms and escorted him out. Ning Kei was unconscious when he was imprisoned in the U prison. This was the first time he saw the inside of the U prison clearly. Torches were lit on both sides of the quiet mountain path. It looked no different from an ordinary prison in the world. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. Then he realized that it was because his snow mountain and ocean of chi were locked, and he could not sense the changes in the chi of heaven and earth around him. Otherwise, he should be able to find those terrifying arrays. Walking out of the U prison, he came to the cliff plateau at the top. The black divine hall of judgment was right in front of him. Ning Kei, who was sandwiched between the 2 deacons, looked in that direction. He wanted to know what Yi Hongyu was doing and what she would think if she knew his current situation. It was late winter, and the Peach Mountain was snowy. The cliff plateau was covered with a thick layer of snow. Several majestic divine halls looked even more solemn and sacred in the wind and snow. Ning Kei looked at his footprints in the snow and found that it was quiet on the cliff plateau. He did not see anyone in the U prison or here. In front of the divine hall of light, the 2 deacons in black knelt down and kowtowed. Then they left quietly. From beginning to end, the 2 deacons did not say a word or even make a sound. This was the second time Ning Kei had come to the Divine Hall of Light. The first night he spent in the Divine Hall of Light was the longest night of his life and left him with the most unforgettable pain. But when he came to the snowy Divine Hall again, there was no lingering fear on his face. He looked very calm. He was very sure that since she allowed him to enter the Temple of Light again, it proved that she had not found a way to break the stalemate. The battle between him and her had finally moved from a stalemate to the next stage. He hoped that he could make his strongest counterattack at this stage. Logically speaking, even if he was not a prisoner but an invited guest of the Divine Hall, he should still wait for the Divine Hall of the Divine Hall to come and pick him. Since the Divine Hall of Light and even the entire West Hill Divine Palace were Song Song's private property, according to the law of the Tang Empire, it was his private property. The Divine Hall of Light was his home. Did he need anyone's permission to return to his own home? Kate gently patted the snow on and walked, as if he was walking in the Divine Hall. As in the Quebec, added the snow in. Different sighs were heard from the other 3 Divine Halls on the plateau. Some were shocked, some were emotional, and some were confused. The sigh from the Divine Hall of Judgment was obviously mocking him. The Divine Hall of Light was still huge and quiet. He walked for a long time into the depths of the Divine Hall and saw the figure of the big black horse behind the pillar that was 1,000 feet high. He walked over and patted the big black horse's neck. He sighed and said, "It seems that the food here is good. You are even fatter than in Chang'an." The big black horse thought that the mistress was not the one it liked, but she was the mistress of the whole world. How could it lose meat to follow her? It looked at Ning Kei with uneasiness and sympathy in its eyes. Obviously, Ning Kei had not eaten much meat these days. He was so thin and haggard that it seemed that he would be blown away by the wind. Ning Kei said, "Don't worry. Isn't it common for a couple to quarrel?" The big black horse looked at his lower abdomen and shook its head sympathetically. Ning Kei felt that his self-esteem had been seriously hurt. He said angrily, When I bring you back to Chang'an, the first thing I'll do is to slap you." The big black horse slightly raised its head and disdainfully thought that as long as it flattered the mistress, Ning Ke would be nothing. The cold wind blew, and snowflakes floated into the divine hall. They fell on the jade-like ground and melted instantly. Ning Ke looked in the direction of the snowflakes and saw that the curtain was lifted. She was still on the terrace. He walked in that direction and stopped about 3 feet behind the balcony. She stood on the edge of the terrace with her hands behind her back. She looked at the human world and the mountains in the wind and snow. Ning Ke's eyes fell on her hands. He thought of the gentle universe and the violent universe that he had felt through her hands. He could not help but want to stay away from her. He did not dare to look at her hands again. He looked at her tall back and found that her figure was clearer than the last time they met. Although there was wind and snow, the lines of her body seemed to be carved on a stone. They were very stable and deep and could not be easily erased. This meant that her imprint in the human world was getting deeper and deeper. Her connection with the human world was getting closer and closer. For Hao Qian, this meant that she was getting weaker and weaker. Ning Ke was very satisfied with these changes in her. Sang Sang did not speak, but since they were connected, Ning Ke could hear her voice as long as she slightly moved her mind. That was her real heart. The bond of the human world can't be cut off. The headmaster left the power of the human world in your body and destroyed the gate of Hao Qian's divine kingdom so that you can't go back. Naturally, he won't leave you any chance. He looked at her back and said, "I don't know if the method you're using now will work. Granting Xiao Qiao eternal life is equivalent to exchanging life for love. The problem is that she doesn't know. Are you willing to wait for her to live a few hundred years in the human world? And she may not be willing to exchange her eternal life for the past with you. As for Chun, Pippi, and Xiaodang, they will not think that they are alive because of your gift." Sang Sang looked indifferent and very confident. After a short silence, Ning Ke continued, "Even if your method is right, it is far from enough. Because there are still second brother and Li Yu. They used to be good to you and are also the fetters of the human world to you. Aunt Wu, who lives next door, often invites you to dinner. How will you compensate her? And don't forget those people in the city of Wei. They were kind to us, but they died because of you. How will you compensate those who have died?" Sang Sang frowned slightly. In the distance, the mountains, shrouded in snow, suddenly had several avalanches, revealing the yellow, withered branches and the color of weeds under the snow. The snow on the cliffside of the Divine Hall of Light was still the same as before. The snow on the terrace became thicker, and the wind became colder and colder, just like her expression and mood at this time. "I can't give up." Ning Ke listened to her answer in the sense of perception and said, just like what the teacher said, human beings have the innate instinct to explore the unknown, which can also be called the desire for freedom. And you are the rule of this world. Your existence and your life come from the form of this world itself. You will not allow this world to be broken. So there's an irreconcilable contradiction between you and the human beings in this world. Sang Sang turned to look at him and said for the first time since they met today, "You are not a human being in this world. Why do you want to be my enemy?" Ning Ke said, "But after all, I am a human being. Since I came to this world, I am a human being in this world. Many years ago in Chang, and I had a hard time reading in the old library and would feel dizzy and vomit every night. At that time, when you were taking care of me, you asked me what I should do if Hao Qian did not allow me to cultivate. My answer at that time was that if that was the case, I had to go against heaven." Sang Sang found that fragment in her memory of the human world. At that time, the master and the servant who were discussing the problem did not know that Hao Qian was her. Now, it was a little strange to think about it. "So you have to go against my will?" She looked at Ning Ke and asked. Ning Ke looked at the only familiar pair of willow-shaped eyes on her face. After a moment of silence, he said, "This is probably the so-called fate. You can't go against it." Sang Sang said, "I am Hao Qian. At least I can change your fate. You are my natal life. My fate is your fate. How can you change it? Only by defying the heavens can you change your fate. Now that I think about it, from the day I picked you up on the side of a bay, I have been fighting with you nonstop. Although I always lose, I am indeed defying the heavens. Ninkei looked at her and said, but you can't, because you can't fight against yourself, just like a human can't lift his own hair and keep his feet off the ground. Sang Sang glanced at him. Ninkei's hands uncontrollably went to the top of his head and grabbed his hair. Then his feet left the ground, and he hung in the air, looking very funny. He sighed and said, "Is this interesting?" Sang Sang said, "Isn't the Academy pursuing interesting?" Ninkei said, "But we have to be reasonable." Sang Sang said, "When has the Academy ever been reasonable?" Ninkei fell down and looked a little embarrassed. Sang Sang did not say anything and left the terrace to walk into the Divine Hall. Ninkei looked at the increasingly violent wind and snow in front of the cliff. He did not dare to stay on the terrace and followed her back into the hall. There was a huge couch on the side of the hall, covered with ordinary soft quilts. Sang Sang sat on the couch indifferently. Ninkei stood in front of the couch and felt a little uncomfortable. At this moment, two girls in white came over with a copper basin and a towel in their hands. Ninkei thought that it was still early. Should he wash and rest? He wanted to tease her, such as sex in the daytime, but he did not dare to say anything when he thought of his current situation. There was clean water in the copper basin, and the temperature was just right. The two girls in white stood beside the couch and did not squat down to serve Sang Sang. Instead, they glanced at him. Ninkei finally understood. He thought for a while and squatted down. He put Sang Sang's feet into the copper basin and began to wash them carefully. "Is this interesting?" he said with his head down. Sang Sang said, "I have a lot of earthly fate with the human world. There are many people I need to make up to, and I'm doing it. And the fate between you and me is that you need to make it up to me, so you have to do it too. I think it's interesting. Revised on 201305261435 to be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 908. When Sang Sang was a human, she seemed a little clumsy and didn't like to talk much. In fact, that was just on the surface. The most fundamental reason was that she had a cold personality. If one looked deeper, the reason was that she never had any real feelings for the world she lived in. The soldiers and civilians in the city of Wei, and Second Brother, and Chun Pippi in the academy had all cared for her. Xiao Xiao had given her many gifts, but she rarely returned them. The past was the bond she had left in the human world. Since she couldn't cut it off, she had to make up for it. But Ninkei was an exception. She had given enough feelings to Ninkei in the human world. She had dedicated all her thoughts and even her life to him, so she didn't need to make up for it. If she wanted to cut off the bond with Ninkei, she would need to take back everything she had given him, such as washing his feet, making his bed, and following him around. To her, it had nothing to do with whether it was interesting or not. It was what she should do. Ninkei didn't think it was what he should do. But compared to the pain of being dismembered, washing her feet was really a small thing. So he squatted down without hesitation. He didn't think it was humiliating, just like what he thought when he knelt down in front of the Divine Hall of Light at the peak during the Right to Light. "You've knelt down to wash my feet for me many times over the years. So what if I pay you back this time?" The temperature of the water in the copper basin was just right for her feet, but a little hot for his hands. Ninkei poured the water on her feet and rubbed them carefully, not even missing the space between her toes. Her feet were still as white as before, just softer and more tender than before, and the skin above her ankles was also white. Ninkei looked at the feet in the basin and thought about these things. Then he found that his hands were scalded red. He then remembered that when she washed his feet in the past, her hands were often scalded red as well. Sang Sang had never worn shoes since she woke up in the northernmost peak. In the city of the Kingdom of Song, the charming woman had given her a pair of shoes, but she had thrown them away as if they were worn out. She walked barefoot through the wilderness, the countryside, the city, all the way to the West Hill Divine Palace and the mortal world. Her feet were still so clean, without any dirt on them. There was not even a speck of dust on her round, smooth, glass-like nails. She looked so beautiful and moving. Ninkei had washed for a long time, but the water in the copper basin was still so clear. It even gave people a feeling that fish must like swimming in it, and it was refreshing even if they drank it. But he still washed her feet seriously and attentively, because he knew that Sang Sang wanted him to wash her feet, not because they were dirty, but because she needed him to wash her feet. Normally, a girl would laugh like a silver bell when being rubbed by a man's hands, no matter whether it was itchy or not. But Sang Sang did not respond, no matter how gentle or heavy Ning Kei's movements were. She looked very serious, as if she was participating in a very important activity. But it was not a religious baptism, just a foot washing. So her solemnity seemed a little ridiculous. Ning Kei picked up her feet from the basin and put them on his knees. He took the snow-white towel and wiped her feet dry. Then he put her feet back on the couch, put the towel on his shoulder, took the copper basin, and went to the terrace of the divine palace to pour the foot-washing water into the wind and snow between the cliffs. The wind and snow were picturesque, and the cliffs were also picturesque. The basin of foot-washing water was like an ink brush in the hands of a naughty child, unreasonably painting a beautiful picture. Ning Kei remembered that many years ago, when he was locked in the cliff cave in the back mountain of the academy by his teacher, Sang Sang served him, cooked, and emptied the toilet bowl. The vegetable washing water and the yellow and white filth in the toilet bowl were all poured into the beautiful cliffs by her, startling the white flowing clouds and the silver thread-like waterfall. It seems interesting, he thought with a smile. Through this period of fighting and today's ritualistic foot washing, he had a better understanding of today's Sang Sang, that is, Hao Ian who had fallen into the human world. She was the collection of the rules of this world. Just like what his teacher said in the restaurant in the Kingdom of Song last year, she was objective, absolutely calm, and absolutely logical. Even if she had a life caused by self-perpetuation and subjective self-awareness, this was her way of survival. This kind of high-level life form was indeed frightening. But in Ning Kei's eyes, Sang Sang was scary but also a little cute, just like the little handmaiden Sang Sang used to be, who seemed a little clumsy. She was never stupid, but just a little clumsy and a little clumsy. She wanted to cut off her relationship with the human world, and if she couldn't do so, she would want to end it. She judged her relationship with the human world according to the cold and objective mathematical method, but she didn't expect that those relationships were not cold. Things like emotions and life could not be calculated. She thought she had found the right way. As long as she paid back what she owed Ning Kei and took back what she had dedicated to him, she could cut off her relationship with the human world and return to Hao Ian's divine kingdom. But she didn't understand that for human beings, sometimes love was not a one-sided contribution, and being loved was not necessarily a one-sided gain. In short, these were all very complicated things. Even if she could calculate, she couldn't calculate all the details. On the contrary, the more she thought and calculated, the easier it was for her to sink into it and couldn't extricate herself. When she began to think in the way of human beings and began to value human emotions, she would gradually lose her objectivity and become more and more like a human being. Ning Kei began to feel that this matter was gradually becoming more and more interesting. The West Hill Divine Palace ruled this world. In order to provide for the disabled elders in the Jisho Abbey, gold and silver from all countries were sent to the Qingqing Mountains. The old Taoists in the cave were even so extravagant that they used the fur of the snowfield direwolf as a mattress. Now the West Hill Divine Palace worshipped Hao Ian. When Hao Ian wanted to eat, it could be imagined how many rare ingredients were sent to the Peach Mountain. A girl in white brought Ning Kei into the kitchen. He had never thought that a kitchen could be more magnificent than the Imperial Palace. He had also never seen so many rare ingredients. Looking at the bear paws piled up like cabbages by the wall, and the dried shark fins soaked in the pond like pickles, he couldn't help but shake his head and said, "Is the Divine Hall going to open a restaurant?" The girl in white blushed. She and her companions had lived in the Divine Hall of Light for half a year and enjoyed infinite glory, but no one dared to talk to them. Although they were devout, they were still young. Hearing Ning Kei's words, they almost laughed out loud. The bear paws are used to make soup, and the shark fins are used to make sauce. Today's main ingredients are at the back. Could you go and see for yourself? Extravagant, too extravagant. Ning Kei walked through the rare ingredients and sighed with emotion. There were a lot of foodies in the academy, and his teacher was the biggest foodie in history. But he had never seen such a scene. He came to the stove and looked at the oil and all kinds of spices in the iron pot. He nodded with satisfaction and asked, "What's her favorite dish recently?" The girl in white thought about it seriously and said, "Master is not picky about food. But once we found a chef from Chong in city to make a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup." Master seemed very happy. Ning Ke understood. The dinner in the Divine Hall of Light was very simple. It was so simple that the two girls in white who were in charge of setting the table looked pale. They were worried that Sang Sang would be unhappy. Ning Ke made a dish of cabbage head and vinegar, a pot of radish stewed with preserved pig trotters, a plate of stir-fried water spinach, and a bowl of egg yolk tofu. He used the most common ingredients. The girl in white was very anxious and suggested that he should at least change the egg yolk in a crab roe, but he refused without hesitation. The dining table in the Divine Hall of Light was also very big, even bigger than an ordinary house. The simple dishes on the table looked even more shabby. Sang Sang sat down at the table. Ning Ke stood beside her and served her a bowl of pig trotter soup and a bowl of white rice. The two girls in white lowered their heads and were too nervous to say anything. Looking at the shabby dishes on the table, Sang Sang was silent for a while. She did not say anything or get angry. She took the bowl from Ning Ke and began to eat. She ate very fast, just like in the old days. The reason why she ate so fast was because she had to clean the table and wash the dishes after eating. The reason why she ate so fast now was because eating was just a habit for her. It had nothing to do with absorbing energy, and it was not a human enjoyment. It didn't take long for the dishes to be almost finished. She ate 3 bowls of white rice and then stood up to leave. Although she did not say anything, she felt that she should be satisfied. Ning Ke looked at the girl in white and smiled. He sat at the table and pulled over the rice bucket. He poured the leftovers on the plate into the bucket and ate it happily. She used to eat leftovers. Now was his turn. She used to wash the dishes after the meal. Now it was his turn. After washing the dishes, Ning Ke felt a little sore. He walked back to the Divine Hall and found that it was already dark. He wanted to light the lamp on the stone wall, but found that someone was ready to go to bed. He made the bed and made the quilt. Then he fetched some hot water and repeated the process of washing feet during the day. Sang Sang withdrew her feet and put them under the quilt. She slowly closed her eyes. Ning Ke washed his feet with the remaining water and poured it into the cliff against the wind and snow. He rubbed his hands and ran back to the bed and sat on it. Sang Sang opened her eyes. Her expression was indifferent and scary. Ning Ke explained very seriously, "Normally, I should warm your bed at this time." Sang Sang frowned slightly and felt a little annoyed. Ning Ke did not seem to see her reaction. He said with a smile, "You used to be cold and never succeeded in warming my bed, but I have a hot body." There were a lot of typos in yesterday's chapter. When I revised it, I also adjusted some words and sentences. I found that it still needs to be revised. If there is enough time in the future, I will try to do it. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 909. Ning Ke said it naturally, especially the last line, hot body. It was like a clumsy poem written by a young poet, which was straightforward and funny. Sang Sang did not feel happy and said indifferently, "No need." Ning Ke felt that she was being polite, or pretending to be polite, or trying to convince himself that she was being polite. So he moved to the bed impolitely, and his hand fell on the quilt. Sang Sang looked at him. There was no emotion in her bright, willowy eyes, not even disgust. Ning Ke's face instantly turned pale, and he began to cough. Once he started coughing, it was hard to stop. He coughed so hard that his heart and lungs were torn apart. He curled his body in pain until he coughed out blood, which fell on the ground like dark red plum blossoms. His chest was as painful as being pierced by a burning blade. He was very worried that if he continued to cough like this, he might die of blood exhaustion or even cough out his heart and liver. Sang Sang's face was expressionless. Ning Ke stood up and left the bed. He rubbed his aching chest and picked up the quilt that should belong to him. He walked to a dark corner and laid on the bed, letting out a sigh. This sigh sounded a little aggrieved. When they were in Min Mountain, he and Sang Sang always slept together. Although they had a bed and a Kong in the city of Wei, they would eventually sleep in the same bed. It was even more so after they went to Chang'an. No matter if it was the old brush pen shop or the Yinming Lake, there was only one bed that was warm. Now their positions were reversed, and he did not even have the right to sleep on the bed. Two girls in white were holding pearwood poles and removing the gauze. Looking at this scene and hearing Ning Kei's aggrieved sigh, the girl who had talked to him in the kitchen could not help but laugh. Although she did not laugh, the smile on her face gradually began to ripple. If it were in the past, Ning Kei would definitely tease the girl in white or pretend to be more aggrieved. But now he did not do anything because he was worried that such teasing would make Sang Sang unhappy, and her unhappiness could easily make the girl in white disappear. He knew that she could do such a thing because she was still Hao Yin. If she could, she would have killed him a long time ago. Since she was willing to kill him, then she was willing to kill anyone. Ning Kei was a very cold-blooded person, but he felt that there was no need for more people to die, especially in this cold divine hall of light. He wanted to bring warmth and nothing else. The two girls in white went to the side hall to rest. The divine hall of light became particularly quiet at night. The wind and snow drifted into the hall from the balcony, but it did not lower the temperature in the hall. Ning Kei did not fall asleep. It was indeed difficult to fall asleep under such circumstances. He looked in the direction of the balcony where the wind and snow were getting heavier and heavier. Thinking that this snow had been falling for many days, he frowned slightly. The West Hill Divine Kingdom was known as the land blessed by Hao Yin. The four seasons were distinct but never harsh. Whether it was midsummer or deep winter, there was no unbearable cold or heat. It was much better than Chang'an. However, the West Hill this winter was much colder than in previous years. It started snowing early and never stopped. Ning Kei did not have the experience of living in the West Hill, but he knew that this situation was somewhat rare. He thought that the master had left Sang Sang, Hao Yin, in the human world. Would the everlasting night really come? He slowly sat up and walked to the couch to look at Sang Sang. Sang Sang closed her eyes, her eyelashes fluttering gently. The length and distance of each eyelash were so precise that they looked like they were drawn. It was unreal. Ning Kei looked at her quietly for a long time. He looked at her eyes and the indifference between them. He looked at her eyelashes and the wisdom in them. He looked at her lips and the redness between them. He looked at her ears and the strands of hair fluttering beside them. He did not know if she was asleep or if Hao Yin needed to sleep. But he knew that even if she was asleep, the changes around her could not escape her perception. But she did not wake up. She still quietly closed her eyes as if she was having the sweetest sleep. Her face was so ordinary, but she looked like the most noble princess. For Ning Kei, Sansang's face was now very strange. But looking at it quietly, he felt that it was more and more familiar, as if she had always looked like this in the past years. He did not understand why. Because she was Hao Yin, or because she was his wife. The night sky above the West Hill Divine Palace was covered by snow clouds. The moon could not be seen. It was dark and quiet inside the Divine Hall of Light, so they could hear the sound of snow falling. His voice was as clean as snow, so soft and fragile. If you want to end the fate between us, so you want me to repay what I owe you, then what about you? Shouldn't you return what belongs to me? Sang Sang opened her eyes. Her slender willow-shaped eyes were extremely bright, without any residual sleepiness or laziness, because she had not fallen asleep. She looked at Ning Kei and asked expressionlessly, such as, Ning Kei thought for a while and did not continue. In his opinion, those things were what he should do. As a proud human being, how could he be as boring as Hao Yin? He looked between his legs and said helplessly, such as this? It's really inconvenient to lose something, especially when it's convenient. Sang Sang closed her eyes again and did not say another word. Ning Kei said, I will continue to look at you, so please do not suddenly open your eyes later. Although you look more ordinary now, suddenly opening your eyes still looks like in a horror movie. Sang Sang did not respond to him. Ning Kei also did not respond to her and himself. He stood beside the bed and looked at her quietly for a long time. When he was tired, He moved a jade stool and sat beside the bed to continue watching. He watched until the wind and snow gradually subsided and the morning light gradually appeared. In the 3450th year of Daji of West Hill, there was a heavy snowfall in the West Hill Divine Kingdom. The Peach Mountain was covered with silver frost and looked exceptionally beautiful. The believers who still gathered in the villages and towns were frozen pitifully. No one knew why the West Hill, which had always been warm, would welcome such a cold winter. The hierarch and others, like Ning Ke, vaguely guessed that it might have something to do with the everlasting night. They looked at the Divine Hall of Light with even more awe. No one knew what was happening in the Divine Hall of Light. After Ning Ke opened the secluded prison and was taken into the Divine Hall, he never came out again. No news came out of the hall either. The story that was happening in the Divine Hall of Light, if one thought about it carefully, seemed a little ridiculous and childish. Of course, naivety was often the cruelest thing. If this was a game of playing house, Ning Ke would, of course, play the role of a servant. He would wake up every morning and start sweeping the courtyard. The Divine Hall of Light was so big that he would be exhausted to clean it. Then he would prepare breakfast, wash the dishes, wash the clothes, make lunch, wash the dishes, mop the floor, prepare dinner, wash the dishes, wash Song Song's feet, and finally drag his tired body to sleep. He ate leftovers and even washed his feet with Song Song's leftover water. For devout Haotian believers like the hierarch, they would probably be willing to drink the water from the copper basin directly into their stomachs because it had the taste of Haotian. However, Ning Ke did not have such a perverted belief, so he naturally could not be perverted. Moreover, in the world he once lived in, drinking his wife's foot-washing water was the biggest insult to a man. In addition to these daily chores, he also had to take care of Song Song's daily necessities, including making tea and playing chess. Making tea was easy, but playing chess. Chin Pippi had never beaten Sang Sang, let alone Ning Quebec. Therefore, playing chess became the most painful and humiliating thing for him. The days were simple and boring. He did all kinds of things tiredly and fell asleep at night as soon as his head touched the pillow. He no longer had the energy to stand by the bed and watch her for the whole night. Sang Sang did not seem to change at all. She was still indifferent. Ning Ke originally had great hopes for life in the Divine Hall of Light. He wanted to make her more and more like a human through spending time with her day and night. But now, looking at her emotionless face, his hopes had long turned into disappointment. One day, he took a bamboo broom to sweep the snow on the terrace. The weather was extremely cold, just like his current mood. There was no smile on his face now, just like the cold mountains. The bamboo broom rustled on the snow, like a brush writing on a slightly coarse bud paper. Countless messy marks were swept on the terrace, which looked like a piece of cursive calligraphy. The person who wrote cursive calligraphy was a little manic. At this moment, the wind and snow suddenly raged and kept falling on the cliff. The terrace that had just been swept was instantly covered with a layer of snow again. The cursive calligraphy was destroyed just like that. Ning Ke stopped sweeping the snow and stood in the wind and snow with the bamboo broom in hand. He looked at the gray sky and asked, "How long will it take? What do you want to do?" Sang Sang said, "I have washed your feet many times, cooked for you many times, mopped the floor many times, and washed the dishes many times. What you are doing now is not even 1% of what I have done." After a moment of silence, Ning Ke said, "You know it's useless. I do owe you a lot, but you also owe me a lot. We will never be able to clear up the debt between us." After saying this, he turned to look into the hall and said, "In Min Mountain, I carried you on my back many times, washed your diapers many times, fed you many times, and killed many people for you." Sang Sang walked slowly and said expressionlessly, "This is a common human emotion, the heart of caring for the young." In the wind and snow, Ning Ke's mood was as cold as the wind and snow, and as angry as the wind and snow. "What about when you grow up? When you were sick, I held you in my arms and warmed you with my body. How can you repay me? From the academy to the Lang Temple, and then to Chuyang City, I have always washed your feet. How can you repay me? I carried you on my back out of Chiryong City and into the wilderness. When the whole world wanted to kill you, I carried you on my back all the time. How can you repay me?" Sang Sang walked to the railing and looked at the human world in the wind and snow with her hands behind her back. Many images appeared in the falling snow outside the precipice. These images were a little blurry, but they were so clear. They were the rain after the drought in Hebei province. They were the young animals struggling in the well in Min Mountain. They were the teenagers who happily cut off the heads of the horse gang by the Shubi Lake. They were the little handmaiden who walked unsteadily with a flagon of wine and roasted chicken. They were the fried egg noodles in the old brush pen shop. They were the morning sun in Chaoyang City. Under the morning sun, he kept running and waving his knife with her on his back. She was weak but happy and leaned on his shoulder, holding the big black umbrella tightly in her hand. I left for home on the 31st and arrived on the 1st because the awards ceremony of the book review competition was held in the evening. Of course, the most important thing was that I missed my wife. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 9-10. The scenes in the wind and snow outside the terrace were all scenes of her in the human world, and he was in all of them. She was Hao Ian, and her story in the human world was predetermined. Only he came uninvited and never left. Whether there was a rope or not, they were always together. She could be completely indifferent to the human world, but not to him. Sang Sang looked at the human world in the wind and snow, and her willowy eyes became brighter and brighter. Her left, I was filled with infinite memories and emotions, and her right, I was filled with infinite hatred and anger. These two completely different emotions were cause and effect for each other. Ning Ke asked her how to return it, and how to return it. I'm ready to forgive your great disrespect and grant you immortality. She looked at Ning Ke and said emotionlessly, but you don't accept it, so you have to sink forever. The wind and snow outside the cliff suddenly became stronger, and those scenes in the wind and snow were torn into countless snowflakes. They were blown to the terrace by the cold wind, and many snowflakes fell in her eyes. The temperature in Sang Sang's eyes quickly dropped. Memories, emotions, hatred, and anger were all frozen into crystal clear ice cubes, and then disappeared without a trace. Ning Ke looked at this scene and felt his heart become colder and colder. He said, "We used to live and die together, and we will live and die together again. I don't want you to leave, and the human world doesn't want you to leave either. For this, I could do many things, just like what I'm doing now. What you've done is far from enough." Sang Sang said, "I once surrendered to you, so you have to surrender to me." Ning Ke understood what she meant by surrender. It was the divine will that had been shaking in his sense of perception. Surrender meant that he had to remove the natal connection between them. He silently picked up the bamboo broom and continued to sweep the snow. The wind and snow outside the cliff were so heavy that it was in vain when he swept a corner of the terrace. The wind and snow were endless, just like the war. But Ning Ke did not give up. He held the bamboo broom and kept sweeping from morning to dusk and still sweeping at night. Sang Sang did not leave either. She watched Ning Ke sweeping the snow without changing her position. The frost dyed her eyelashes silver, and she looked very beautiful. Late at night, the snow finally stopped. Ning Ke continued to wave the bamboo broom and swept all the snow off the cliff. He didn't stop until there was no snow left on the terrace. He was just an ordinary person now. After sweeping for a whole day, his back was already sore. A simple straightening movement made him frown in pain. You see, as long as you keep sweeping, you can always sweep, because the snow can't fall forever. He looked at Sang Sang and continued, I'm not afraid of sinking forever, because I never believe in eternity. As long as you are in the world, you can't always win. Sang Sang did not say anything. The terrace was quiet and dark in the night. Suddenly, a faint light fell. The balcony of the Divine Hall of Light, and even the entire Peach Mountain, became lively. Although it was still cold, it was more beautiful. Ning Ke looked up at the night sky and saw a crack in the gloomy, snowy clouds. The bright moon was passing through it and shining its moonlight on the world. He smiled and greeted it. Sang Sang glanced at the bright moon and still did not say anything. The night clouds gradually separated and became thinner. The bright moon became brighter and brighter, and the moonlight shining on the mountains and fields became more abundant. The whole world was plated with a layer of silver halo. The mountains around the West Hill Divine Palace were especially beautiful under the moonlight. The snow, divided into various shapes by the mountain terrain, seemed to have become Ning Ke and Song Song's favorite things. Since it was their favorite, it was naturally the most beautiful in their eyes. Ning Ke put the bamboo broom in the corner and walked to the railing. He looked at the mountains under the moonlight and said, "The moonlight tonight is as bright as 100,000 taels of silver. It's so beautiful." Sang Sang walked to him and said, "Yes." She said it very naturally, as if she had said it on a whim without any thought. Ning Ke's hands trembled slightly and slowly fell on the railing. After a long silence, he turned to look at her eyes and said, "You are Sang Sang." The Sang Sang in this sentence was his little handmaiden Sang Sang, not Hao Yin, who was called Sang Sang. Sang Sang did not say anything or look at him. She just frowned slightly. Ning Ke looked at her and continued, "Even if you don't admit it, you are Sang Sang." Sang Sang turned and walked into the divine hall. Ning Ke looked at her back and shouted, "I bet 100,000 taels of silver that you are Sang Sang." After a moment, Song Song's cold voice sounded in the divine hall, "Go get some water to wash my feet." Life in the divine hall of light was very ordinary. In Ning Ke's opinion, Sang Sang would be weakened by his means, but he did not expect that it was also a kind of torture for him. He wanted her to come back to him, instead of being alone outside the world. But he could not see a glimmer of hope. She did not change at all, as if everything was in vain. He could not hold on any longer. Tonight, when the wind and snow disappeared, he finally swept the balcony and the moonlight shone on the world. He heard Song Song's words. Hao Ian would not express her emotions about anything in the world because she did not care about it. She sighed to the moon tonight, not because of the headmaster, but because he said that the moonlight tonight was as bright as 100,000 taels of silver. What she really cared about was the silver. That kind of care was so strong that she even forgot that she was Hao Yin. Since she cared so much about the silver, she must be Sang Sang. Ning Ke's mood was very complicated. He was happy because he finally confirmed that Sang Sang was Sang Sang. He was also excited because he saw the hope of victory. But he was also a little anxious because when he saw hope, he would have a strong impulse and desire. He wanted to put his hope into reality. Because of these complicated feelings, he washed Song Song's feet for a long time tonight. Even when the warm water in the copper basin became cold, he still kept washing. The water was a little cold, so were Song Song's feet. He kept rubbing them with his hands, but he could not raise the temperature of the water and the skin, so his hands became cold as well. But Ning Ke did not feel uncomfortable. Because of the change of mood, he felt that Song Song's feet were very fragrant and soft tonight. It was very comfortable to rub them. He even wanted to wash them like this forever. It was like the saying that he could not bear to put them down. Ning Ke's movements became slower and more delicate. He gently rubbed the soles of her feet, her insteps, her ankles, and sometimes he would gently scratch them. He also gently rubbed her shell-like toes, feeling the wonderful touch. Gradually, there was a taste of warmth and lust. Tonight, he washed her feet for a long time, as if he wanted to wash them forever. Ning Ke's throat became tighter and tighter, and the expression on Song Song's face became more and more indifferent. She knew what he was thinking at this time, but she did not get angry, because those are the lowly physiological reactions of human beings. They did not even have the qualification to make her angry. Under the moonlight, Ning Ke looked down at the pair of white lotus-like feet in the copper basin for a long time. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at her silently. She looked at him silently and did not say anything. The two looked at each other for a long time. There was nothing but desire and desire in Ning Ke's eyes. In the deepest part of Song Song's eyes, there was not only strong disgust, but also a trace of confusion. She found that at this moment, her heavens will become a little chaotic. Ning Ke stared at her eyes and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I want to fuck you." The reason why his voice was a little hoarse was that he was very nervous and excited. Sang Sang blinked her eyes expressionlessly, crushing the trace of confusion in the deepest part of her eyes. A bloodstain appeared on Ning Kei's throat, which widened at a speed visible to the naked eye and kept going deeper into his throat. It had touched his vocal cords, and he could no longer speak. Blood flowed from his neck and dripped into the copper basin. The clear water suddenly turned red. His hands and her feet were soaked in the water, as if he was trying to pick a white lotus in the pool of blood. Ning Kei's eyes were a little red, like a ferocious beast at a certain time. He ignored the blood on his throat, slowly stood up, and approached Sang Sang. There was still no emotion on Sang Sang's face. A looming space crack appeared in front of the bed, between her and Ning Quebec, that represented the boundary of her world. As long as Ning Kei continued to move forward, he would die. Her world did not allow any human to enter, even if Ning Kei was the special one. Ning Kei saw the boundary of her world. He could not break it, so he chose to close his eyes and fall forward. He wanted to use the most basic rule. The gravitational force between all things was the rule he borrowed. No matter whether he would regret it or not, he could not change the fact. Even if he would be beheaded later, he could not change it. He fell toward her. The space crack did not fall on his throat, but on his cheek. There was a very thin wound on his cheek, where there used to be a small dimple. He collapsed on top of her. He pushed her down on the bed. His blood flowed onto her body. He opened his arms and hugged her tightly. Since you let go of the world and let me come to you, then don't think about running away from me. Ning Kei and Sang Sang looked at each other, very close. In the dream, this scene happened many times. In the dream, they had been intimate countless times, but in the real world, this was the first time. Ning Kei felt that the body of the woman in his arms was very fat, very soft, and a little strange, because his Sang Sang was very thin, but also a little familiar, because he had smelled this woman for many years. His right hand instinctively fell on her towering breasts, his fingers deep into her cyan clothes. He felt that he was lying on a boat, rising and falling with the waves on the ocean, and it felt very wonderful. There was no expression on Sang Sang's face, and her eyes were unusually bright. She stared at him without saying a word. Ning Kei's desire was very strong, and the most powerful instinct of life began to wreak havoc, but there was nowhere to release it. The divine hall of light was silent. He kissed her lips lightly. In the dream, he had kissed her before. In the real world, he wanted to kiss her too. Hao Yin was kissed by a man. Thus, the whole world began to tremble. Note, this sentence came from the Chi Hall's Weibo. The chapter name is Michael Jackson's album. These two chapters are the two most important chapters of the coming night, and they're related to God, so they have to be named like God. The first two chapters have been revised, and you don't need to read it again, just the words. Today's update is a little late because I've started to quit smoking and I feel very uncomfortable. Friends who don't smoke may not understand, but recently, my mood must be very bad and I may be easily irritable in communication. Please understand in advance. It seems a little stupid to quit smoking at the most important time of the coming night, mainly because I have to write 200,000 in June, so I might as well do it earlier and try to get through this period as soon as possible. Finally, I wish everyone good health, and let's work hard to train together so that we can go against the natural order. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 9:11. Ning Kei and Sang Sang did not close their eyes. Their eyes became closer and closer until they merged into one. In the depths of Sang Sang's eyes, stars were destroyed and then reborn, turning into confused stardust. Everything was in God's plan, but she still felt a little confused when it came to the end. She found that she did not hate the contact with Ning Quebec. This fact made her extremely angry. She clenched her fists tightly and looked at Ning Kei in front of her. Feeling the disgusting wetness on her lips, her divine body tightened like a rock and began to tremble violently. Ning Kei woke up from the previous strange mental state and realized what he had done. He was actually kissing her. He thought she was Sang Sang, but he still could not suppress the fear. The fear made his body extremely stiff and then began to tremble slightly. They hugged and kissed each other on the couch. Because of the trembling of their bodies, their lips kept rubbing against each other, feeling a little numb and itchy. Even their teeth gently bumped against each other, making a crisp sound. This was trembling. Ning Ke hugged Sang Sang and trembled more and more violently. The bones and joints in his body began to make cracking sounds. She also kept trembling. The cyan dress on her body made a faint cracking sound, as if it was cracking somewhere. They trembled more and more violently. Then there was a boom. The couch under them collapsed. Ning Ke and Sang Sang fell on the hard ground of the divine hall. The ground shook and undulated like waves. Several extremely deep marks appeared on the surface of the pillars that supported the divine hall. The hard walls of the divine hall seemed to be blown by the strong wind of tens of thousands of years. Countless stone chips peeled off and fell on the ground, making a clapping sound. It seemed to be applause, but also seemed to be something else. This tremor left the Temple of Light at an unimaginable speed and began to spread in all directions of the world. The snow covering the cliffs began to peel off one after another, forming countless small snow waterfalls. The peach blossoms that were frozen by the snow broke off the surface of the frost, revealing their beautiful faces in the cold wind. The strangely shaped stone drums on the 1,000-mile-long dike of the Song Kingdom started jumping up and down, smashing countless reefs and splashing black sea mud into the air. The drums buzzed like war drums. Along with the drumming, countless storms were born in the depths of the sea. The black seawater rolled as if it was boiling, and the dark clouds in the sky twisted like wet clothes in the hands of a deity. It was a great sound. The Ink Lake in the Mogan Mountain of the Great River Kingdom splashed with countless splashes. Emo Shan Shan sat by the lake and looked at the restless lake water. She did not know what had happened, but she felt a little lost and perplexed. Looking back at the mountain hut decorated with lanterns and streamers at the foot of the mountain, she felt inexplicably sad and slowly shed 2 lines of tears. The great swamp was also shaking. The white reeds in the wind and snow looked so pitiful. The lake water poured into the river and then out of the city of Lincoln. Yisu and hundreds of poor men were repairing the waterway in the winter. He looked back at the West Hill Divine Kingdom thoughtfully as he looked at the dirty water flowing over his feet. In Yisu's shabby house, Tang Xiaodang sat by the bed and used a spoon to put the chicken soup into Chun Pipi's mouth. The soup in the spoon suddenly rippled. The whole world was shaking. There were countless earthquakes in Hao Yin's world. Not many houses collapsed, and not many people died, but everyone felt it. The divine halls of West Hill was at the center of the trembling. People on the Peach Mountain felt it most clearly. Thousands of divine priests and deacons put on their clothes and ran out of their houses to look at the divine hall of light with fear written all over their faces. Tens of thousands of believers in the villages and towns at the foot of the mountain were also awakened by the trembling. They rubbed their eyes and helped each other out of their houses into the wind and snow. They looked in the direction of the divine halls of West Hill and did not know what to say. The hierarch, Yi Hongyu, Zhao Nanhai, and the others came to the divine hall of light. They looked extremely solemn, but no one dared to step into the divine hall. The world gradually stopped shaking. The eaves of the divine hall of light collapsed, and the pillars were about to fall. But it did not collapse. Under the moonlight, it looked like the scene after a storm. The divine hall of light was quiet again. Ning Ke held Sang Sang in his arms and lay on the rubble of the bed. The friction between their lips and their bodies was no longer as intense as before. It became a gentle breeze lingering between them. Like a gentle breeze, Ning Ke's mind gradually calmed down, while Song Song's eyes became more and more confused. She felt that she was immersed in the most wonderful warmth, as if she was floating in the sea in midsummer. She felt that she was embracing the most real warmth, as if she was embracing the ocean under the sun. When he first entered the awareness state, he had seen a sea. It was not until now that he remembered that when he first perceived the sea through meditation, he was holding her as a little girl in his arms. Now he finally returned to the warm sea again. He did not want to leave again. He held her in his arms and kissed her lips gently. Other than that, he did nothing else. The two gently embraced each other and leaned on each other tightly. The slightly cold winter wind entered his lips from her lips. It was like they were breathing each other's breath. The warmth of life passed from her body to his. It was like their heartbeat. There was only her in his world and only him in hers. Ning Ke and Sang Sang entered a wonderful state of mind at the same time. After a long time, Sang Sang shivered on her body and Sang Sang shivered on his body. There was no winner or loser in this battle between heaven and man, or between man and woman. They finally achieved the great harmony of life between love and hate. The front hall of the divine hall of light collapsed. Smoke and dust rushed into the night sky and covered the eyes of the moon. In the loud bang, the divine priests and deacons of the West Hill Divine Palace on the cliff platform became extremely pale. Thousands of people subconsciously rushed to the divine hall of light and then stopped uneasily. The hierarch lord became extremely serious, but he did not dare to do anything. He even felt that it was a blasphemy to speculate. In the early morning, Ning Ke woke up from that wonderful mental state and realized what had happened last night. He looked at Song Song's face in silence. His silence was different from the silence of men in the morning. There was no awkwardness, only vigilance. Since they were in love, he did not know what would happen after they fell in love. All of a sudden, his body emitted some wonderful sounds. It was the sound of snow water flowing over the gravel and the sound of the sea of clouds drifting over the foothills. He heard the most wonderful sounds in nature and realized that after this night, his ocean of chi and mountain of snow that had been locked had regained their freedom. Sleeping with Hao Ian could bring such a return. He looked at Song Song's face and smiled. He thought that it was the best deal in the world to marry such a wife. Sang Sang closed her eyes as if she was still sleeping like a human. Her breath was very long and subtle. If one did not pay attention, he would even think that she was not breathing. His long and steady breathing suddenly became hurried. She opened her eyes and looked at Ning Quebec deep in her eyes. The sea of stars, composed of billions of stars, began to surge violently with endless power hidden in it. After all, Ning Ke was a human being. It was inevitable that he felt a little uneasy for Hao Ian to do such a thing. He subconsciously wanted to defend himself, but he did not even have the time to say that he would take responsibility. An extremely angry roar burst out from Song Song's lips. It sounded like the most terrible wind in the wilderness passing through the skull of a bison on a dry riverbed. Ning Ke's arm was instantly broken into 20 pieces. Each piece represented a year that he had been with her. She had forgotten all of these 20 years, so he could no longer hold her. A terrible power raged on the ground of the divine hall like a hurricane. Before he could react, he was thrown dozens of feet away and hit heavily on the wall of the divine hall. The wall was originally painted with murals of ancient myths in the West Hill scriptures. After the tremor last night, the murals were seriously damaged and had long lost their colors. At this time, after being hit by Ning Ke, the remaining surface of the wall peeled off even more. Then, it was dyed red with blood, and the myths became bloody. Ning Ke sat under the wall with his legs spread open and kept coughing up blood. He looked extremely miserable. Sang Sang floated in front of him. There was no emotion on her face, and her face was extremely pale. Ning Ke looked at her and grinned. His teeth were full of blood, as if he had bitten her plump body. But his eyes were full of loneliness and disappointment. The cold wind in the divine hall of light was piercingly cold. He clearly felt that the power of rules was seeping into his body along with the cold wind and was about to lock his snow mountain and ocean of chi again. Did nothing change after all? Ning Ke finally understood how the Empress felt at the last moment of her life. Looking at the pale Sang Sang, the loneliness and disappointment in his eyes were swept away and became extremely calm and fierce. Although you were my handmaiden, you were never my slave. He stood up and looked at her with a smile. So I don't want to continue to be your slave. The cold wind rose again, and his great spirit suddenly burst out. His figure turned into a residual shadow and rushed to the balcony facing the cliff, leaving a clear line of blood behind him. His feet landed on the balcony, trampling the new layer of snow that had just been laid in the morning. He rushed to the railing, and without any hesitation, he slapped the railing with his palm and jumped. Slap the railing all over, and look at the end of the world. Slap the railing all over, and I will cut off my road. He jumped over the railing and jumped down the cliff. At the same time, Sang Sang came to the railing. She didn't have time to stop him from jumping off the cliff. She didn't expect him to jump off the cliff. Heaven couldn't predict him because he wasn't her people, let alone her slave. She stood by the railing and looked at him falling in the clouds. He floated in the fog and looked at her by the railing. Separated by life and death, the two looked at each other in silence. Time seemed to stop at this moment. Do you want me to die so much? Sang Sang looked at Ning Kay falling into the abyss and felt a little pain in her chest. She thought it was the injury from last night, but it was not. The 74th and 75th chapters have been revised again. I will replace them when I get home. There are very few changes, so you don't need to read them. Yesterday, I said that these 2 chapters are the 2 most important chapters of The Rising Night. I am quite satisfied with the result. Starting and turning, this is the turning. Next is the turning of 3,000 miles. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 9:12. Looking at Ning Kay, who kept falling between the cliffs, Sang Sang suddenly remembered that Ning Kay often told her some stories in the city of Wei many years ago. In those stories, the extremely angry villains would often say, "You want to die? Not so easy." The most basic rules of this world were in her hands, and the appearance of nature was completely up to her. She had already come to the human world. How could it be so easy for you to die? Sang Sang flicked her sleeves, and the flowers on her sleeves seemed to come alive. The divine hall of light behind her continued to collapse with a rumbling sound and gradually became ruins. Countless streaks of chi of heaven and earth responded and turned into a cold wind. The snow outside the cliff suddenly became chaotic, and the clouds below the cliff were cut into countless strands and then densely weaved together, turning into something like a quilt. Ning Kay fell between the cliffs. Suddenly, he felt that the space around him became sticky, and countless strands of clouds lingered. They softly interacted with each other, and the speed of his fall suddenly became much slower. In this dense cloud, he felt the power of rules, and even more clearly felt her will. She did not allow him to die like this, so it was difficult for him to die. Ning Kay could not accept that his life and death were in the hands of others, even if that person was her. Since he had jumped into the abyss, he did not want to succumb to her will again. Facing the countless layers of clouds below him, he stretched out his hand and wrote a word in the wind. His hand trembled violently because the wind between the cliffs was too strong, and because his arm bones were broken into 20 pieces. Just moving even a little bit would bring him great pain. But his word was written very clearly, and every stroke seemed to be engraved on the cliff. No matter how the wind blew, the clouds would not erase it. A sharp talisman was suddenly released between the cliffs. The cloud represented the power of rules, and it was set by Hao Yin herself. Logically speaking, except for people like the headmaster, no cultivator in the human world could break it. But Ning Kay was an exception because she was his natal. More importantly, in the divine hall of light, in a Yu prison, in reality, and in his dreams, he had been tortured by her countless times. He had used his flesh and blood and endless pain as the price to truly experience her power of rules countless times. During the days when he was imprisoned in the Yu prison, Ning Kay had spent all his time learning the power of rules that she had demonstrated, apart from fighting with her in his dreams. As far as the eye could see, among the countless reincarnations in the human world, he understood Hao Yin the best. Now, his grasp of the power of rules in this world had also far surpassed that of all his predecessors. He wrote a talisman on the precipice. This divine talisman was not the most powerful divine talisman he had ever written. Compared to the Taoist talisman he had written in the blue sky of Chong, and it was not even worth mentioning. However, This talisman of E had vaguely touched the threshold of the basic rules of space. Noiselessly, the countless layers of clouds and mist between the precipices were torn into two huge gaps. The gaps converged in the middle and turned into four pieces before rolling towards the precipice. Ninkei broke through the clouds and fell faster and faster. The remaining wind and snow between the cliffs were smashed into the finest powder when they touched his fluttering sleeves. Soon, he landed below the three cliff plateaus. The stone window that the U prison had carved between the precipices flashed past. The precipices and rocks became a rapidly changing monochrome picture in his field of vision. Occasionally, protruding rocks were stretched into extremely straight lines. One could imagine how fast they were falling. The howling wind rang in his ears, and the cold wind cut his face like a knife. He looked at the dark abyss at the bottom of the fog, looking at death, but his expression was so calm and fearless. You used to be so afraid of death. Now, you would rather commit suicide than let me die? Sang Sang stood by the railing and looked at Ning Kei, who had become a small black dot between the precipices. Her face was slightly pale. If he fell into the abyss, he would definitely die. If he died, how could she live? The moment she arrived in the human world, she could cover 1,000 miles with one step. It was easy for her to save Ning Kei from the precipices. The problem was that she slowed down on the second step in the human world. Because the headmaster had poured the mortal dust in her body, her aura had become a little turbid and she could no longer leave the earth. Song Song's hand gently fell on the railing. She did not touch the railing, and the railing broke. The railing was completely broken, and the cliff at the terrace collapsed towards the precipices. She walked toward the clouds and mist outside the cliff. Between the precipices at the foothills of the Peach Mountain, there were countless booming sounds, like thunder. In fact, it was the sound of something breaking through the air. A figure in indigo appeared between the precipices, and the snow clouds scattered in fear. The resentment of the U prison's sinners for thousands of years had turned into fog. They did not dare to invade and hid between the precipices. She descended from the sky and came to his side. The mountain wind blew the hair on her cheeks, but it could not move her indifferent expression. She and Ning Kei fell into the abyss side by side in the wind. She did not look at him, but her will fell on him. "Do you want me to die so badly?" Ning Kei looked at her quietly and said in his heart, "No, I just don't want to live alone. Compared to this, I would rather the two of us die together." The dispersed clouds between the precipices gathered again. Ning Kei could no longer be seen, nor could he see Song Song's indigo dress. The abyss at the bottom of the fog was extremely quiet, just like it had been for thousands of years. The hierarch, Zhaonan Hai, and the others came to the edge of the cliff and looked down with a solemn expression. They did not feel anything. After a moment, there was a sudden violent vibration from the abyss below the precipices. Something must have fallen heavily on the ground of the abyss. The terrifying impact force from the bottom of the fog rose up and tore the clouds between the cliffs apart again. Even the precipice that was attached to various Taoist formations had many cracks on it. The sect leader and the others all had ugly expressions on their faces. How could anyone survive such a terrifying collision? Of course, Hao Ian should be fine. But how could she come back from the abyss? In a corner of the half-ruined Divine Hall of Light, a horse neighed anxiously. The sound of hooves sounded like a rainstorm. The big black horse knocked over several deacons in black and rushed down the mountain. The abyss was full of fog. No matter how hot the sunlight was, it was difficult to fall on the ground. Ning Kei opened his eyes and looked at the gray sky. He felt as if he had returned to the city of Wei in the 9th year of the Tianqi era. That year, the city of Wei ushered in the most violent sandstorm. He felt a little dizzy, and it took him a long time to wake up. He realized that he should be in the abyss behind the Peach Mountain, and then he found himself in a pit. Jumping from the peak would naturally make a deep pit on the ground. What he could not understand was why he was still alive. If Sang Sang kept him alive, then where was she? The trees at the bottom of the abyss were different from those outside. Obviously, their roots were much more developed than the branches and leaves. Most of the trees were vines with thin and sparse leaves. Perhaps no one had ever come here before. Countless years of decayed leaves had accumulated together and formed a thick layer. Ning Ke had not completely woken up from the dizziness caused by the impact. He felt very comfortable lying on the soft, decayed leaves. He did not want to stand up at all, and even wanted to lie like this forever. At this moment, Song Song's voice sounded in the fog. "How long are you going to lie like this?" Her voice was still so cold, so ruthless, and so solemn, but the content of her words had gradually become human. Ning Ke listened to her voice in the fog, but it also seemed to be ringing in his ears. He could not help but sigh with emotion. She was indeed Hao Yin, who was far away but close to his ears. "Get up." Song Song's voice sounded again, and her mood became colder. Ning Ke's expression changed slightly. This time, he finally heard clearly that her voice was indeed ringing in his ears. He endured the pain and turned around, only to find that she was under him. There's a very big pit on the ground in the fog forest, and the bottom of the pit was full of decayed leaves. Sang Sang was lying among the decayed leaves. She was tall and fat, and in the fog of decayed leaves, she was like the earth. Ning Ke was held in her arms, and he looked like a child. Ning Ke rolled away from her arms with difficulty. He tried to bend his elbow to sit up, but found that he was in great pain. He did not know how many bones in his body were broken, and he spat out a mouthful of dirty black blood. Sang Sang stood up. Her body was perfect, and she was not hurt at all when she hit the ground from such a high place. Even her indigo dress was not torn, and only a few leaves were stuck on it. She reached out and pushed her scattered black hair behind her shoulders. She looked at Ning Ke, who was rolling in pain and coughing up blood, and said indifferently, "Don't think you can escape from my palm." Ning Ke's mouth and nose were constantly overflowing with blood, and he looked very miserable. Hearing her words, he felt a little funny and also a little sad. He said, "I am not that monkey. If I really want to die, no one can stop me." Sang Sang slightly squinted her eyes, and she was very disgusted to hear his answer. She said, "In front of me, even if you want to die, it is not so easy." After saying this, she reached out her right hand and put it on his body. The clear light between her fingers illuminated the fog and Ning Ke's cheeks. The clear light gradually became stronger, and Song Song's face became slightly pale. His injuries were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. The broken bones were reassembled, and the ruptured internal organs were repaired. The wound she left on Ning Ke's face last night also disappeared. His dimples seemed to be deeper than before, and they were filled with clear light, as if they were filled with good wine. After doing all this, she stood up, put her hands behind her back, and walked into the depths of the fog. Tranquility looked at her back for a long time, and then stood up and followed her. He was going to die, and she could not let him die. In other words, she did not want him to die. So she left the West Hill Divine Palace with him, jumped off the fog, and fell into the abyss. Now they did not have that rope, and he did not tie her to him. But that invisible rope had always been there, and they were still tightly tied together by fate. At the bottom of the abyss, the fog was thick, and the rotten leaves were soft. The two were separated by a few feet, and they walked forward in silence. Their feet stepped on the ground silently, and it was so quiet that it was frightening. They walked like this, and the surrounding scenery did not change. There were only withered vines and old trees, and a few faint crows in the fog. The moss on their shoes was getting thicker and thicker. Ning Ke looked at her back and asked, "Where are you going?" Sang Sang stopped and said indifferently, "Didn't you decide before? Tomorrow I will set off for home. I will fly from Yichang first, and then stay at the airport for a night. The day after tomorrow, I will fly to the Qin Kingdom. The writing time is not fixed, and the update may be late. Good morning. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 9:13. Sang Sang was right. In the past, when they were on the road, it was always up to Ning Ke to decide where to go. She never raised any opinions or objections. In Ning Ke's words, she was not stupid. She was just too lazy to think about such trivial things. She was used to letting him think about it. Ning Ke was silent. He walked past her and came to the front. It was only a few steps, but his breathing became rapid and his face turned pale. He had been tortured countless times these days. His arms were cut off, and his blood flowed endlessly. If Sang Sang was not by his side, he would have died many times. Although he was alive and there were no scars on the surface of his body, the new flesh and blood had not completely merged with his mind. When he fell from the sky to the ground, those invisible injuries had all broken out. Every step he took, he felt that his soul was shaken, and the pain was unbearable. Sang Sang felt his pain, but her expression was still indifferent. Ning Ke stood among the decaying leaves and rested for a while. He found a slightly tough tree and walked deep into the fog with his tired body in pain. The abyss under the precipice at the back of the Peach Mountain was covered by clouds all year round. There was no way to the outside world. Just like the abyss under the back of the mountain of the academy, it had been isolated for countless years. No one knew what kind of life lived in it and what kind of dangers were hidden there. At this time, the two people walking in the fog were not worried at all, because no matter how terrible the danger was, it could not hurt Hao Yin. The only thing that could hurt them was each other. Sang Sang looked at Ning Ke's back, expressionless and silent. She could easily restrain him, reseal his snow mountain and ocean of chi, and then bring him back to the West Hill Divine Palace at the top of the Peach Mountain. He would continue to be a slave and never be freed. But Ning Ke had shown her his determination to die by jumping off the cliff. Then it would be meaningless to bring him back to the West Hill Divine Palace. Besides, she had her own ideas. Since she had made up her mind, Sang Sang put her hands behind her back and followed Ning Ke casually in the thick fog. She looked at those strange vines with great interest. Ning Ke was a little tired from walking, so he sat on a stone to rest. He looked at Sang Sang, who seemed to be very relaxed in the fog, and said, "I know you look down on my methods, but I have no choice. Compared to you, I'm too weak. I don't have to cry, throw a tantrum, and threaten to hang myself to get you out of Peach Mountain. In fact, these methods should be used by you. Since you don't want to use them, I have to." Sang Sang ignored him and walked to the depths of the black vines. She opened her eyes wide and looked up curiously. Seeing her expression, Ning Ke was a little surprised and then a little hopeful. After a while, Ning Ke regained some strength and stood up with the support of a branch. He walked to the black vines in the fog and shouted, "It's time to go." Sang Sang walked out of the vines with no expression on her face. It seemed that she didn't find anything interesting. But Ning Ke noticed that there were some light red water stains on the corner of her lips. Then he saw that she was holding 7 or 8 bright red fruits in her hands behind her back. He thought that the fruits must taste good. Ning Ke didn't say anything and kept walking forward. The fog in the abyss became thicker and thicker. He and Sang Sang couldn't see each other's faces clearly, even though they were a few steps apart. The scenery in the fog naturally became more and more blurred. They could only vaguely see the shadows of the vines and occasionally hear some strange sounds. Sang Sang, who left the Divine Hall of Light and came to the abyss, was obviously different. She wanted to explore the environment around her, and she wanted to taste the fruits. She began to be instinctively curious about the unknown like human beings. Of course, she would never be afraid of the unknown like human beings. Because of her growing curiosity and the lack of fear, the abyss full of fog was undoubtedly a very interesting environment for Sang Sang. She left Ning Ke from time to time and disappeared into the fog. No one knew where she went or what kind of scenery she saw, and then she quietly returned to Ning Ke's side. In the beginning, Ning Ke didn't even know that she had left. When he found out that she was playing this game of disappearing, he instinctively began to worry, and then found that his worry was a little unreasonable. In Hao Yin's world, who could hurt Hao Yin? He didn't worry that she would get lost. No matter how thick the fog around her was, no matter how dim the light was, as long as he thought about it, he would know where she had gone, and he knew that she would definitely come back. As long as she was there, he didn't need to worry about himself. The abyss was dark all year round. The fog contained the resentment of countless prisoners in the U prison on the precipice, as well as the naturally accumulated toxins. The combination of the two was extremely terrifying. After Ning Ke cultivated the Great Spirit, his body had a natural resistance to toxins. After walking in the fog for a long time, he still felt a little dizzy. At this moment, Sang Sang returned to his back. A breeze blew past, and he suddenly felt refreshed, as if he was immune to all poisons. The real danger in the abyss was not the poisonous fog, but the creatures living in it. Living in such a dangerous environment until now, these creatures had extremely strong vitality and unimaginably fatal means. Ning Ke released his psyche power into the fog, and found that whether it was the old wet vines, the snakes and beasts hidden among them, or even the rotten leaves on the ground, there were all hidden lives. He couldn't help but feel a little numb. Walking in the fog, he and Sang Sang had already encountered several strange creatures, most of which were snakes. One of them was covered with mucus, and its eyes had obviously degenerated. It relied entirely on the emerald green snake tongue to find the direction. More snakes were colorful, and even in the thick fog, they were still so eye-catching. The most terrifying thing was the swaying sound from the withered vines and the surrounding trees, and the howling that sounded like ghosts crying. Ning Ke knew that there were animals jumping in the forest, but even with his eyesight, he couldn't see their true faces clearly. He could only judge that the animals were extremely fast by the sound. Then what was hidden densely under the rotten leaves? Why did it make him so vigilant and even afraid? Sang Sang didn't feel afraid. Listening to the unpleasant howling coming from the fog and the rustling sound coming from the rotten leaves under her feet, she felt a little annoyed and waved her sleeves. As she waved her green sleeves, flowers bloomed, and countless fireflies flew out of the petals. Those fireflies flew into the depths of the fog and burned, turning into countless light spots and finally converging into a bright light. The light appeared in the abyss, and no matter how thick the fog was, it could not be covered. With the burning sound, the fog around them dispersed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the scenery suddenly became clear. The ground was covered with countless layers of rotten leaves, and the roots of the trees were covered with moss and strange mushrooms. The vines hanging on the branches were crooked and shapeless, like the binding plums in the house by the Yinming Lake. From the depths of the forest came the horrified howling of the beasts, and the rustling sound from the rotten leaves became more and more frequent. The colorful snakes angrily raised their heads, and Ning Ke's expression became extremely serious. But before he could do anything, the horrified howling stopped abruptly, and the rustling sound under the rotten leaves disappeared without a trace. The snakes even lay down on the wet ground as fast as they could. Sang Sang walked into the depths of the fog, without waiting for Ning Ke to lead the way. As she walked, the light quickly spread around and quickly cleared all the fog within a few miles. The abyss, which had not seen the sun for countless years, suddenly became clear. If the situation continued like this, it wouldn't take long for Song Song's light to disperse all the fog and expose the abyss to the blue sky. The blue sky was very familiar to the creatures outside the abyss, but was so strange to the creatures living in the abyss for generations. They looked at the porcelain blue sky and kept screaming in horror. The light continued to spread, and countless green ants crawled out from under the rotten leaves. They kept rubbing their forelimbs towards Song Song's footprints to show their fear and submission. The colorful, poisonous snakes crawled all over the mountain streams, desperately twisting their sticky bodies, as if they wanted to descend to the deepest part of the swamp. The beasts hiding in the fog forest finally showed their true faces. Hundreds of ghost-faced monkeys left the vine trees and knelt on the wet ground, constantly kowtowing. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke slightly frowned and felt a little uncomfortable. Sang Sang did not have any reaction, as if she saw nothing. She walked through these frightened creatures with her hands behind her back, not like a monarch who was inspecting her territory, because she did not treat these lowly creatures as her subordinates. This abyss, full of fog and poison, was like a natural moat for human beings. Even a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state would find it difficult to walk out of the abyss. But for Sang Sang, this abyss was not even a small ditch. She strolled out of the miasma and saw the mountains. Looking at the mountains, Ning Ke did not know what to say. Dark clouds quietly covered the blue sky again, and the mountains were shrouded in wind and snow. A simple Taoist temple could be faintly seen in the snow. Was that the Taoist temple, the legendary Jishou Abbey? If it was in the past, Ning Ke would definitely be very interested in that simple Taoist temple. Not because it was an unknown place, but because it hid 6 of the 7 tomes of arcane. However, Sang Sang, who wrote the 7 tomes of arcane, was now beside him, so his interest in the Taoist temple naturally faded. Someone had walked out of this abyss before. The Taoist temple in the wind and snow did not look shabby, but it was so quiet that it was intoxicating. Long Qing sat cross-legged by the lake, quietly looking at the open hand scroll of the tomes of arcane in his hand. He did not know how long he had been sitting in the snow, and the snow on his eyelashes had already condensed into frost. Suddenly, he heard a voice coming from the bottom of the cliff. Thinking of the painful days in the abyss, his face instantly became extremely pale, and the snow on his eyelashes turned into ash and disappeared. The middle-aged Taoist pushed the wheelchair to the lakeside. The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair and looked at the sky and the wind and snow. He looked at someone in the abyss and let out a low sigh. I said in the middle of the month that I don't want a monthly ticket, so I haven't asked for one. No matter how itchy I am, I have to grit my teeth and bear it. The third young master teased me in the single chapter, so I have to bear it. Boo-hoo. I know those who have voted for the General Night monthly ticket will feel a little. I'm sorry to you. Before I end the book, I will definitely fight for it, for myself and for everyone. Most of this chapter was written at the airport, so there may be some problems with the quality. I will go home tomorrow, and then I will fix it. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 9:14. Long Qing was able to come out of the abyss alive because of the gray eyes and the heavenly power pill. Every time he thought of the difficult process afterward, he would feel a lingering fear, but also a little proud. After all, he had survived and might be the first person to walk out of the abyss alive. Who would have thought that someone would walk out of the abyss today? And that person seemed so relaxed, as if he was taking a stroll in the park. He guessed the person's identity and was shocked beyond words. The tomes of arcane in his hand seemed to lose their attraction. The Abbey Dean also had mixed feelings. He looked up at the falling snow and sighed after a moment of silence. Since she has left Peach Mountain, it's our turn to go back. The wind and snow grew stronger and shrouded the Taoist temple and the surrounding mountains. With a squeak, the door of the temple was pushed open. Long Qing and the middle-aged priest came out in a wheelchair. The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair with an ordinary blanket on his knees. He reached out his skinny hand and brushed off the snow on the blanket. Then he slowly closed his eyes. Peach Mountain was also in the wind and snow. Thousands of divine priests and deacons had gathered on the cliff plateau, but they were all silent. They looked at the half-ruined divine hall of light and thought of the loud noise that came from the abyss below the precipice. They vaguely guessed what had happened, but they could not believe it and were extremely shocked. No one dared to enter the divine hall of light. The divine priests and deacons stood in front of the divine hall of light with pale faces. They did not know what to do next. They had been standing in the wind and snow for a whole night. It was an emergency. When the hierarch came to the divine hall of light last night, he did not have time to take the sacred sedan. His skinny and short body was exposed in front of everyone. The snow was hanging on his sparse eyebrows, which made him look ridiculous. But his expression was so serious, as if he did not care about what had happened in the past. Nothing was more serious than what had happened in the divine hall of light. When dusk fell, the hierarch could not wait any longer. He walked into the divine hall and came out after a long time. His expression was as solemn as the mountains and as cold as the snow. The people of the divine halls of West Hill looked at the hierarch's expression and knew that their guess was not far from the truth. Their expressions became extremely frightened. Some old divine priests even fainted in despair. Had Hao Ian really left the divine halls of Westhill? Was she going to abandon her most devout followers? Later, the Hao Ian Divine Hall was dead silent. The hierarch stood before the curtain. His body was thin and short, and now he was bent over powerlessly. He looked even more pitiful. There were only him, Yi Hongyu, and Zhao Nanhai in the hall. His voice was a little tired as he said, "The Tao sect must guard this secret and not let the believers in the world know." Zhao Nanhai nodded solemnly and agreed with the hierarch's plan. Yi Hongyu looked at the hierarch expressionlessly. The sword hidden in her red dress seemed stern. The hierarch didn't notice her change. He looked at her and said anxiously, "Send out all the people of the Divine Hall of Judgment. We must invite him back to Peach Mountain." His mood was somewhat perplexed and extremely anxious. He did not have the natural and unrestrained bearing of a great swordsman surpassing the 5 realms. He looked like a child who had been separated from his mother on the street. Looking at the hierarch's slightly trembling eyebrows, Yi Hongyu showed a slightly mocking expression. Then she slowly raised her right hand and began to shine under the bright light behind the curtain. She was ready to draw her sword. As long as her Taoist heart moved slightly, the Taoist sword would pierce through the air. She knew that the hierarch was still powerful, even though he had been seriously injured. But she did not want to wait any longer. At this moment, there was a faint noise on the mountain path below the Divine Hall. Then, there were hurried footsteps. Several divine priests suddenly walked into the Divine Hall and reported in a trembling voice, "Someone is coming." 3 people from the Jisho Abbey came to the Divine Halls of Westhill. Long Qing walked in front and was the vanguard. The middle-aged priest pushed the wheelchair behind him. The Abbey dean sat in the wheelchair, looking calm and natural. His indigo robe was so clear in the thin snow that it was as pure as the sky. Thousands of divine priests and deacons on the cliff plateau looked at the 3 people walking slowly from the foot of the mountain. They were shocked to think that the clear light array of the divine halls of Westhill did not respond. When they recognized that it was Long Qing who walked in front and vaguely guessed the identity of the person in the wheelchair, no one dared to stop them. The dense crowd parted like tide. The Abbey dean sat in the wheelchair and looked at the divine halls that he had not seen in close proximity for many years. His expression was indescribable, whether it was nostalgia or indifference. But when he saw the divine hall of light that was already in ruins, he slowly frowned. Dozens of old divine priests hurried over and then knelt in front of the wheelchair in the most humble manner. They paid their respects to the Taoist in indigo. They had lived long enough to see the true face of the Taoist in indigo. The divine priests and deacons on the cliff platform were just guessing the identity of the indigo-robed Taoist. Now, seeing this scene, how could they not understand? They could not help but look at each other. Some divine priests and deacons of lower seniority were infected by the atmosphere in front of the Divine Hall of Light and also knelt down. Zhao Nanhai, Yi Hongyu, and the people from the South Sea in the Divine Hall of Revelation all rushed to the Divine Hall of Light. These noblest bigwigs of Peach Mountain all paid their respects to the Taoist in indigo in the wheelchair. It was the Abbey Dean's arrangement that the South Sea people returned to the Divine Halls of Westhill. Now that the Abbey Dean had come to Peach Mountain, they naturally had to show their attitude. Yi Hongyu had lived in the Jisho Abbey when she was young, and her most respected brother was the Abbey Dean's disciple. How could she not kneel? There were only 2 people in the Divine Hall of Haoyan. The Abbey Dean sat quietly in the wheelchair, and the hierarch stood in front of him with a complicated expression. Looking at the Abbey Dean in the wheelchair, the hierarch trembled slightly. He could not understand. The Abbey Dean had been crippled by Ning Kei's God-stunning array, and even Haoyan had abandoned him. Besides, he had not come to the Divine Halls of Westhill for many years. Why did he have to do nothing but show up at Peach Mountain? And yet the hierarch was deserted by his own people. Only now did he realize that he had underestimated the Jisho Abbey's status and influence in Taoism. There was dead silence in the hall. The brilliant light behind the curtain had disappeared, like a candle that had been burnt out, revealing a sense of desolation. The hierarch knew that he could kill the Abbey Dean in the wheelchair with a single thought. However, he did not dare to do anything because he was afraid. What scared him the most was that he did not understand why he was so afraid of the Abbey Dean. How could a cripple bring him such a sense of oppression? Finally, he knelt down in front of the wheelchair and said, "Greetings, uncle." The Abbey Dean said, "Have you ever called me uncle since you became hierarch?" The hierarch lowered his head and said, "Uncle, you have traveled to the South Sea for many years. It is difficult for us to meet." The Abbey Dean said, "In your opinion, it is better not to meet." The hierarch did not say anything. He knew that any explanation or words would be meaningless in front of the Abbey Dean. He just did not understand what the Abbey Dean wanted to do. "I am really sorry. I was so sleepy after 2 days of traveling that I fell asleep while writing. This chapter only has 2,000 words. Also, I would like to thank everyone who participated in the book review activity. Thank you for your hard work. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 9:15. The Abbey Dean looked at the hierarch and said indifferently, "You want to know why I came back? You probably won't believe it, but I came back because Hao Ian needs my help." The hierarch was silent. He thought to himself, "You entered the state of pureness in Chong and cut off the connection with Hao Ian. That's why Hao Ian punished you. You are still a useless person. Not to mention that Hao Ian is omniscient and omnipotent and doesn't need the help of mortals. Even if she needs help, it shouldn't be you." The Abbey Dean knew what he was thinking and said with a smile, "Hao Ian doesn't want my help, so I imprison myself in the Jisho Abbey. Now that she has left the Peach Mountain, it means that there are some things she can't solve. So I came back to see if I can help her, or at least do something she can't." The hierarch still didn't understand. The Abbey Dean looked as calm as the lake in the Taoist temple. He said, "Faith is a simple thing. Even if faith abandons you, you will not be shaken. That is true faith." Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked out of the abyss and walked among the mountains. The blue sky was already covered by thick clouds. The increasingly violent wind and snow created countless plumes of dust on the ground, blocking their sight. The two continued walking. When the wind and snow gradually calmed down, they finally came to a rugged mountain path. Then they heard a cheerful neigh coming from the front. The clopping of hooves sounded like a rainstorm, and the neighing was continuous. The big black horse galloped towards them from afar, shaking its head and wagging its tail as it ran, looking extremely happy. When the big black horse ran to Ning Ke, it was surprised to find Sang Sang was also there. It immediately lowered its head and humbly walked to Sang Sang, wagging its tail gently to please her. "Useless thing," Ning Ke said with a smile. Then he found the big black umbrella, the arrow box, and the iron knife were all on its back. He was a little surprised and didn't know how it did it. He patted the big black horse's neck and said with emotion, "Finally, we are all here." Ning Ke, Sang Sang, the big black horse, and the luggage, except for the carriage which was still in Chong, and were the most standard combination when they fled to the world. Sang Sang did not pay attention to the shameless big black horse beside her, nor did she care about Ning Ke's lament. She walked forward along the snowy mountain path with her hands behind her back. This simple mountain path hidden in the mountains was very long. Usually, no one came here. The path was in disrepair for a long time, but it did not affect them at all. They saw the flowery clothes fluttering in the wind. Someone walked with a stick. The big black horse led itself and carried a pole, helplessly following behind them. After walking for several hours, they finally walked out of the barren mountain and came to a fork. Ning Ke looked at the snow-covered mountains and asked, "Where do we go next?" Sang Sang said emotionlessly, "You forced me to leave Peach Mountain even at the cost of your own life, just to bring me to the human world. Since that's the case, what difference does it make where I go?" Ning Ke looked at her hair floating beside her face and said, "Since you are willing to leave Peach Mountain with me, it means that you want to return to the mortal world. Then there must be a place you want to go." Sang Sang said, "I said, you lead the way." Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "We are not far from the kingdom of song. Where should we go?" The big black horse listened to his suggestion and lowered its head. It thought to itself, "Master, you'd better not show your cleverness in front of the mistress. Otherwise, you'll be laughed at." Sang Sang said, "You want to take me to the world like the headmaster of the academy, to eat all the delicious food and see all the sceneries in the world. That won't work for me." Ninkei looked a little embarrassed. He unconsciously slid his palm on the stick made of twigs and said, "You think too much. I just remember that the food in that restaurant is good." Sang Sang said, "I have been to that restaurant, so let's go somewhere else." Ninkei said, "Or to Linkhong. There's someone preaching there. His ideas are somewhat different from the West Hill scriptures. Maybe you will be interested in it." Sang Sang said, "I don't care about how humans interpret my will." Ninkei said, "That sounds abstruse." Sang Sang said, "I am the way of heaven." Ninkei understood and said, "Why don't we go back to the city of Wei?" Sang Sang was silent for a while and said, "You should want me to go to Chang'an the most." Ninkei said, "I don't know if you are willing to go." Sang Sang said, "Not now." Ninkei mentioned a few more places, but they were all rejected by Sang Sang coldly. He thought of the conversation in the abyss miasma and said helplessly, "You asked me to lead the way, but you don't agree with the places I suggested. So it's still your decision." Sang Sang said, "You have mentioned the east, west, and north. Why don't you mention the south?" Ninkei didn't know how to answer. The south of the mountains of the West Hill Divine Kingdom should be the famous river, and the south of the river was the Great River Kingdom. Sang Sang looked at him and said expressionlessly, "Why don't we go to the Great River Kingdom?" Ninkei said, "That place is far away from prosperity. It is really a remote place. There is no special scenery, and it is hard to see new people." "Of course I didn't think of it." Sang Sang said, "But there are people we know there." Ninkei pretended not to understand and said, You and I know many people in this world." Sang Sang said, "What are you afraid of?" Ninkei didn't say anything. Sang Sang looked at his eyes quietly and said, "You are afraid that I will kill her." Ninkei said, "Why do you want to kill her?" Sang Sang said, "Hao Yin doesn't need a reason if he wants someone to die." Ninkei looked at her eyes and said after a moment of silence, "Or are you jealous?" Sang Sang's expression didn't change. She said, "You are afraid that I will kill her because subconsciously you want me to be jealous. It doesn't mean that I really have such low emotions." Ninkei still looked at her eyes quietly and said, "But you are jealous." Sang Sang didn't say anything. "Otherwise you wouldn't ask me why I didn't choose the Great River Kingdom." Ninkei laughed, like the proud look of the cat in the old brush pen shop every time it caught a mouse. Sang Sang smiled slightly and said, "Then are we go to the Great River?" Ninkei said, "Can I object?" Sang Sang said, "Yes, but I won't accept it." Ninkei said, "Then let's go." The big black horse listened to their conversation from behind and couldn't help but feel bored. Thinking that he might see his favorite mistress, he couldn't help but feel happy and nervous. What he was worried about was also what Ninkei was worried about. Sang Sang came back to the human world. If she really became more and more like a human, it was naturally what Ninkei wanted to see the most. However, she was after all the omnipotent Hao Yin. Coupled with the complex emotions of humans, no one knew what she would do. All the way to the south along the mountain path, the wind and snow gradually disappeared. The sun shone on the hills and fields. The south was still unbelievably warm in the deep winter. After coming to the hilly area, Sang Sang left the mountain path and walked along the straight line to the south. No matter how difficult the terrain was, it was a smooth road for her. However, it was very hard for Ninkei and the big black horse. He couldn't help but complain. Who was leading the way now? One day, there was a sudden thunder-like roar in front of the hills. The air also became more humid. Ninkei naturally thought of the waterfall in the back of the mountain of the academy and second brother's courtyard. He couldn't help but be curious about how majestic the waterfall in front of him was. How could the sound travel so far? When they came to the cliff, Ninkei found that it was not a waterfall, but a majestic river. The yellow waves were torrential, and the water was extremely abundant, surging between the black rocks and the yellow soil. In this valley with a huge drop in elevation, the yellow river water flowed rapidly, forming several extremely wide waterfalls. The water heads collided with each other, creating a thunderous roar, shaking the rocks in the water as if they would shatter at any time. This was the legendary Great River. Looking at the yellow river in front of him, feeling the slight tremors coming from the cliff stones under his feet, and experiencing the infinite power contained in the river, he was greatly shocked. He understood why this river could help the Great River Kingdom block the elite soldiers of the South Jin Kingdom, and also why Liu Bai could comprehend Tao here in the past. He naturally thought of the sword that flew from the sword garret to the Peach Mountain in autumn. When he was sweeping the Divine Hall of Light, he saw the ancient sword left behind by Liu Bai in a corner after his death. The headmaster of the academy had once used that sword to kill the Golden Dragon and the Divine General. Liu Bai put his soul into that sword and proudly went to the Peach Mountain to challenge Hao Yin alone. That ancient sword was the sword of the human world. Now the sword was still here, but the person who used it was no longer here. Looking at the surging yellow river and thinking of the predecessors, Ning Ke had mixed feelings. Looking at Sang Sang, who was standing beside him, he didn't know what to say. Sang Sang looked at a black rock by the river and said, "Liu Bai learned swordsmanship here." They went all the way to the south and came to the place where Liu Bai learned swordsmanship. Ning Ke understood that this must be Song Song's will. He looked at the faint sword mark on the black rock thoughtfully. After a moment of silence, he reached out his right hand into the slightly wet air. Holding the iron cutlass in the thundering river, he began to meditate. He wanted to learn some knife intent from the place where the predecessors learned swordsmanship. Sang Sang said, "You are a talisman master." Ning Ke understood what she meant and said, "I can also write talismans with a knife." Sang Sang said, "You are much more spirited than a few days ago." Ning Ke said, "Seeing the relic and thinking of the predecessors can always motivate me." Sang Sang said, "Humans are always easily immersed in such useless emotions." Ning Ke said, "Otherwise, why did you bring me here?" Sang Sang said, "I brought you here because I want you to understand that even someone as powerful as the headmaster of the academy and as arrogant as Liu Bai are still no match for me. You should give up." Hearing this, Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He brought her back to the mortal world to continue the battle with his teacher. He wanted her to become more and more like a human. But in this process, what she wanted to do was to make him truly surrender. When Liu Bai entered Taoism, he saw the yellow river in front of us. Ning Ke said, "When I entered Taoism, I saw an ocean. From this point of view, as long as I cultivate diligently, there will be a day when I can surpass Liu Bai. I could do what he couldn't do." Sang Sang said, "When you entered Taoism, you could sense an ocean because I was by your side that night. It doesn't mean that your talent and cultivation is really that high. You think too much." Ning Ke was a little annoyed and said, "Why do you care what I think? I have something to do today and tomorrow. I will speed up from the day after tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 9:16. The yellow river turned into countless waterfalls here. Smoke filled the air, the sound of water was like thunder, and the turbid waves were rolling endlessly. The scene was very shocking. Ning Ke stood on the bank in silence. Sang Sang walked to the black rock by the river. As her bare feet landed, the sword marks on the rock gradually faded until they disappeared. Those sword marks were left by the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai. They represented the will and decisiveness of the human world. Since she was here, she naturally wanted to erase them. Looking at this scene and thinking that the relics of the predecessors would no longer exist, Ning Ke suddenly felt his heart become extremely empty. But there was no way he could change this. He sheathed his knife and looked a little sad. The Great River Kingdom was to the south of the surging Yellow River. Since they wanted to go to the Great River Kingdom, they had to cross the river. The river here was terrifyingly rapid, forming many hanging waterfalls at the broken parts. Ordinary people could not cross the river at all. They had to walk dozens of miles in both directions to cross the river using sheepskin gates. Ning Ke did not want to continue feeling down, because that was what Sang Sang wanted to see, just as he wanted to see Sang Sang become more and more like a human. He decided to do something to make himself happy again. "Sister, I want to cross the river. Who will carry me?" He looked at the surging river and sang happily. Sang Sang had heard him sing this song when she was young. She turned to look at him and said, "Your world is really noisy." After saying this, she walked into the river with her hands behind her back, as naturally and casually as if she was walking to a meadow. As her bare feet landed, the surging river suddenly stopped. It was not really stopped, but the river could not get close to her. The turbid yellow river kept beating the invisible barrier at her feet, forming countless tiny bubbles. Sang Sang continued to walk into the river. The turbid waves suddenly parted, revealing the mud below. The mud instantly solidified and became smooth rocks. Her bare feet landed on the rocks like white lotus blooming. The turbid river kept attacking from upstream, but no matter how fierce it was, not a single drop of water could fall on her indigo clothes. Her feet were not even wet. Ninkei understood that this was her world. Looking at this magical scene, he could not help but think of the legend of Moses parting the Red Sea in that world. He led the big black horse and hurriedly followed. 2 people and a horse walked into the raging river. The river water parted, and the river mud turned into stones, naturally forming a dry passage. The river water from upstream could not pass through, so it gradually piled up higher and higher. When they walked to the middle of the riverbed, on the other side of the invisible barrier, the river water was already several feet high. Ninkei looked at the translucent water wall formed by the river beside him. He looked at the high-speed rotating water flow and the floating fine sand inside. He wanted to reach out his fingers to touch it, and even wanted to put his fingers into it to feel the sand flow and water flow inside. However, he did not dare to do anything. Such a miraculous scene was shocking and soul-stirring. He was worried that if he broke through the water wall, the river would pour onto his body. He was already a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state, but he still did not dare to confront the river head-on, because the power in the river came from nature, which was not something that ordinary humans could compete with. Sang Sang looked calm, with no trace of seriousness or vigilance. She walked slowly in front of the water wall with her hands clasped behind her back, as if she was walking in a beautiful meadow. Only Hao Yin could defeat nature. The yellow water wall grew higher and higher until it blocked the sun in the sky. The stone passage at the bottom of the river became extremely dark, and the big black horse's eyes gradually showed fear. Ninkei was also very worried that the water wall would collapse. He was even more worried that if the water wall continued to rise and did not collapse, there would inevitably be a flood upstream, and the people on both sides of the river would suffer a disaster. The yellow water wall finally collapsed, and a straight white wave appeared in the middle of the raging river. In an instant, the passage at the bottom of the river and the 2 people and the horse inside were submerged. Ninkei was not swallowed by the river, and his body was not even wet. The yellow water wall collapsed, but did not fall down, and instead flowed over the river. The passage turned into a cave in the river, and the walls of the cave were all condensed by the river water. They walked in the cave, and the light was dim, but they could clearly see every detail in the water. The light penetrated the muddy river and sprinkled on them, modeled like a painting. The river water flowed over their heads, and the sand in it flowed like a painting. Everything was like a painting. The big black horse neighed in amazement. Ninkei opened his eyes and looked at the picturesque scenery in the river, and could not bear to blink. Only Sang Sang was calm, as usual. Continuing to the south, they came to a small town with more and more people. It was a market day in the town, and it was very noisy and lively. There were all kinds of stalls along the street, selling insoles, bamboo baskets, eggs, and of course, most of them were selling food. Ninkei looked at these scenes and gradually calmed down from the shock of seeing the wonders along the way. He held the border rope and walked casually with Sang Sang. This was his home field. There was a stall at the corner of the street, and a dark man with a white headscarf was sitting beside an iron stove. He stepped on something with his foot, and something was spinning in the pot. Sang Sang slightly lowered her head, still with her hands behind her back, and looked calm. She looked very much like an old man choosing goods in the antique market, and also like an old man checking the stored grain in the granary. Smelling the faint sweet aroma and the faint burnt aroma that was difficult to capture, she knew that the thing in the pot was sugar. She just didn't understand why the thing in the pot would keep spinning when a man stepped on it. Why was it able to pull out wisps of cloud-like things in the end? It looked very beautiful. Although the man was a little curious about the girl's tall stature, he did not care much about it. After a while, he wrapped a fluffy cloud and handed it to an excited child beside the pot. "Cotton candy. I used to buy it for you when you were little," Ning Ke said. Sang Sang still did not speak, but just looked at him quietly with a particularly focused expression. Not long after, the cotton candy in the pot was ready. The man inserted a wooden stick and handed it to her. She slightly frowned and hesitated. Ning Ke took out 2 copper coins and handed them to the man. He took the cotton candy and stuffed it into her hand. The man took the copper coins and found that they were Tang coins. He was a little surprised, but also very happy. After all, in the Great River Kingdom, Tang coins were more useful than the official currency. Walking out of the market, Sang Sang held the cotton candy, but did not eat it. She explained to Ning Ke, "I have seen cotton candy before, but I forgot how it was made." Ning Ke thought that she was Hao Yin. How could she forget something that she had experienced? Sang Sang said again, "I know how it works. Why did you buy it?" Ning Ke said, "Of course I bought it to eat." Sang Sang glanced at the cotton candy in her hand and said, "I did forget how it tastes." The picture of a fair, fat, and tall girl holding a white and fat cotton candy in her hand was a little funny and also a little cute, especially when she lowered her head to take a bite and a few strands of sugar were stuck in the corner of her lips. Ning Ke looked at her and said with a smile, "If you still can't remember, we can eat it a few more times." The smile on his face was very strange. It was a little like an elder looking at a child with love and pity, but also a little like a proud person who had succeeded. In short, it was very annoying in Song Song's eyes. Sang Sang frowned slightly, and divine light overflowed. The sugar on the corner of her lips was instantly purified. She looked at the cotton candy in her hand and hesitated for a while before handing it to the big black horse. The big black horse was a little surprised and then quickly became excited. To be able to eat Hao Yin's food, or more precisely, to be able to eat Hao Yin's leftover food, as long as one was not an idiot like Ning Ke, who did not know how lucky he was, it would be the greatest honor. It stretched out its tongue and rolled the cotton candy into its mouth. It smacked its mouth, and the cotton candy went into its stomach. It found that it did not taste anything and could not help but feel a little unsatisfied. Seeing that Sang Sang did not finish the cotton candy, Ning Ke could not help but feel a little disappointed. Looking at the big black horse's unsatisfied look, Ning Ke became even angrier and scolded. "How many lives have you not eaten? Why are you so greedy? Have I ever deprived you of food? Did I buy this cotton candy for you? How dare you open your mouth?" The big black horse thought to himself, "She gave it to me. As long as she likes it, it is none of your business." He turned his head and was about to ask for credit from Sang Sang, but unexpectedly found that Song Song's face was also a little ugly. He thought painfully, "Since you like it, why did you give it to me? Can you two not let me get involved in the fight between you two?" There were children playing outside the market. 2 of them held cotton candy in their hands and carefully licked it from time to time. They seemed to cherish it very much and would probably have leftovers by the time they went home. Sang Sang looked at the cotton candy in the children's hands and felt a little sad. Ning Ke sneered and said, "Keep pretending. Don't regret it." Sang Sang clasped her hands behind her back and walked out of the town, as if she did not hear what he said. Although it was deep winter, the Great River Kingdom in the south was still warm. The sun in the sky was dazzling and fell on people's bodies, making them feel a little hot. After walking to the mountain in the south of the town, Ning Ke was still talking about the cotton candy. Sang Sang suddenly stopped and broke a branch from a tree beside the mountain road. Ning Ke did not know what she was going to do and was a little curious. Sang Sang raised the branch and stretched it to the sky. The sky was clear and cloudless. The distant sea of storm in the kingdom of song was suddenly covered with dark clouds. One of them landed with the wind and floated thousands of miles to a small mountain in the great river kingdom in the south. The cloud landed on the branch in her hand. The sun was blocked by the cloud, and the mountain road suddenly became quiet. Sang Sang looked calm and continued to walk south with one hand behind her back and the other holding the branch. The cloud on the branch was bigger than the mountain. What a big cotton candy! Looking at this extremely shocking scene, Ning-Ke was completely speechless. He never thought that she would pick a cloud from the sky to pretend to be a cotton candy just because she was angry. She was indeed Hao Yan. Hao Yan, who had human emotions, was really unpredictable. Thinking that she was his woman and looking at the cloud on the branch, he felt very proud and self-abased. When he walked into the capital of the Great River Kingdom, all his emotions turned into anger. Because the Great River Kingdom was holding a happy event, I really wanted to write about the scene of walking under the river in more detail, or more seriously, but I was in a rush, and if I wrote too much, it would seem like I was trying to fill in the blanks. I saved a picture just to write about that scene, to climb up those steps and see those scenes. This is something I really wanted to do, but never had the chance to do it in detail. I'll try to do it properly in the future. Bean's ascension to evil is really well written. I really like this chapter. I like cotton candy the most. If it were turned into a picture, it would definitely be very cool. I'll write 2 more chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 9:17. The Great River Kingdom and the Tang Empire were far from each other, but they had been on good terms for generations. The people living here admired the Tang Empire's culture. Over the years, countless envoys and students have been sent to Chang'an. Chang'an could be seen in the government system, architecture, culture, and even the details of life. Jingdu was the capital of the Great River Kingdom. There were snow-capped mountains outside the city, and most of the houses in the city had black eaves. Countless flowers and trees were planted in the corners of the gardens, and the imperial city could be seen in the shadows. The people who lived here were also extremely beautiful. Their brows were calm and gentle, and their gazes were focused and determined. They wore light-colored long dresses, and gorgeous cloth belts were tied around their waists. Many of them had long black sheathed wooden swords at their waists. Walking into Jingdu, Ning-Ke looked at the strange yet familiar scenery and people and naturally felt close to them. When he found that there was a branch of Qinjinji cosmetic store next to Chong'an Gate, he was even happier. Do you want to have a look? He turned to Sang Sang and asked. Sang Sang looked at the sign of Qinjinji cosmetic store and said, I'm so fair now. Do I still need makeup? Ning-Ke said, it doesn't matter. Besides, you can buy some makeup. Sang Sang thought for a while and walked into Qinjinji cosmetic store. Ning-Ke and the big black horse looked at each other and saw the joy in each other's eyes. The branch of Qinjinji cosmetic store in Jingdu was the largest one in Chang'an. One could imagine how much the girls in the Great River Kingdom liked Tang products. Usually, Qinjinji cosmetic store would be very busy and the cosmetics boxes on the shelves would be dazzling. But today, Qinjinji cosmetic store was a little quiet. Ning-Ke and Sang Sang walked in and were surprised to see the empty shelves. Sang Sang slightly squinted her willowy eyes and showed signs of anger. If Hao Yan was angry, who knew if there would be a flood that would drown all the flowers and trees in Jingdu? Ning-Ke hurriedly comforted him and asked the shamefaced boss. Then he found out that the new autumn products of Qinjinji cosmetic store had been ordered by the Imperial Palace a few days ago. It would take at least a month for the new products to be delivered from Chang'an. Why does the Imperial Palace need so many cosmetics? Why are there so many palace maids? Ning-Ke thought of a sentence in an article and shook his head. He sighed and said, the Wei River is full of fat. Sang Sang suddenly said, 6 palace cosmetics are colorless. She had heard this poem from Ning-Ke when she was young. Ning-Ke was very uneasy. He thought that if he really broke into the palace because he was unhappy, no one would dare to say anything. He said helplessly, what are you talking about? None of them were written by one person. There are many girls who were dissatisfied like Sang Sang. 2 girls from the Great River Kingdom looked at the empty shelves and thought about the makeup for the spring festival. They couldn't help but complain. I don't know what the king is thinking. For the sake of the wedding, there's no place to buy makeup. Her companion said, Does the monarch really dare to marry her? The young girl replied, Who else is qualified to marry her except the monarch? His companion said worriedly, Everyone in the world knows that she likes Mr. 13 of the Academy. Even if she dares to marry, does the monarch really dare to marry her? Aren't you afraid that the Tangs will be unhappy? Ning Kai and Sang Sang, who were about to go out, stopped when they heard the discussion. He didn't do anything, nor did he turn around to ask. He just stood in the doorway and listened. He knew that there would be a big happy event in the capital soon. And Mo Shanshan was about to enter the palace as the empress. Ning Kai looked at the beautiful flowers and trees opposite the shop. After a moment of silence, he stepped over the doorway and held the reins of the big black horse, walking out of the capital. There were still flowers and trees everywhere outside the capital. There was a hidden stream between the trees. Across the stream was a tall and straight poplar tree. Ning Kai let the big black horse run to relax, and then he sat down against the poplar tree. He looked very calm. Sang Sang knew that he was very cold, but she was still a little surprised, because in her memory, the girl who was about to marry was very important to him. She walked to the stream in front of the tree and looked at the flowing clouds in the stream with her hands behind her back. She said, Why aren't you angry? Previously in Chinjinji Cosmetic Store, when the two girls from the Great River Kingdom mentioned that the monarch was going to marry Mo Shanshan, they were still worried about whether the Tangs would be angry. Not to mention Ning Kai said, I was a little angry when I first heard it. But when I walked among the flowers and trees, I suddenly realized that I have no right to be angry. The flowers and trees are there, not mine. Sang Sang turned to look at him and said, Humans are really good at hypocrisy. Ning Kai looked at her ordinary face and somehow felt a little agitated. He said, You already knew about this, so you asked me to come here? She was Hao Yin and naturally knew everything, except that she didn't know that the cosmetics in Chinjinji Cosmetic Store were all sold out. Ning Kai looked at her eyes and asked, Did you do this? Sang Sang said calmly, Do you think I will care about such a small thing? Ning Kai admitted that she was right and said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have maliciously speculated about you. Sang Sang said, What you think is not important to me. Ning Kai stood up from under the tree and walked to her. He looked into her eyes and said, But you knew about this, and you asked me to come and see it happen. What do you want to do? Sang Sang said, For countless reincarnations, I have looked down on the human world from the divine kingdom. I have seen your joys and sorrows, your fights and intrigues. But there are still some things that I don't understand. What things? Ning Kai asked. For example, the feelings that you cherish but sometimes throw away. Sang Sang put her hands behind her back and looked through the forest, flowers, streams, and city walls to the men and women in the city. She said indifferently, You said you love me. Then what is love? Ning Kai said after a moment of silence, Some things can't be explained with words. Sang Sang said, But I should be able to see it, so I want to see it. Ning Kai frowned slightly and said, See what? Sang Sang looked into his eyes and said, See what love is. Ning Kai said, Does it have anything to do with the happy event in the capital? Sang Sang said, Of course, because I want to see whether you love her or not. Ning Kai didn't know how to answer, so he said, Does it make sense? Sang Sang said, The love recorded in the ancient books of human beings is so stupid and persistent, and they refuse to be interfered with by others. So since you love me, how can you love her? Ning Kai didn't know how to answer, so he kept silent. Sang Sang began to feel curious in the fog of the abyss, and this feeling continued until now. She really wanted to know the answer to those things that she couldn't understand. She looked at him, but it seemed like she was looking at the men and women walking hand in hand under the flowering trees in the capital. She asked seriously, Can love two people at the same time? Ning Kai could only keep silent. Sang Sang continued to ask, How to measure the degree of love? You love me, or you love her, or you love me more. Since words can't describe it, how can there be more love? How can there be more love? Ning Kai could not say anything other than silence, because no one could answer her question. I can feel that you are very upset, even angry in your heart, so I don't understand. I know you don't want Mo Shanshan to marry that man, but in my opinion, it doesn't seem to be the same as my understanding of love, because you don't want to marry her. Since you don't want to marry her, why don't you let her marry someone else? Why would her marrying someone else make you so disappointed and make you want to destroy it? Sang Sang was puzzled and said, in my understanding, this is the possessiveness of a male to a female. It is a strong instinctive desire for his bloodline to reproduce. If this is the case, then what is the difference between what you humans call love and sexual intercourse? When she spoke, she looked very calm and did not show any jealousy. She was really like those diligent students in the front yard of the academy who just wanted to find an answer. Ning Ke was a little disturbed by her calmness and asked helplessly, "What do you want to say?" "What I want to say is, since there is no love, then your love for me is naturally fake." Sang Sang said calmly, but she didn't finish her words, "Or, my love for you is also fake." Ning Ke said, "Is there any meaning to such a boring inference?" He had sighed before. "Is there any meaning to this thing?" Sang Sang laughed. Since leaving Peach Mountain, she smiled more and more frequently. "Maybe there is no meaning, but it is very interesting." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "I think you are more like a student of the academy than I am now. It's very strange. I don't feel disgusted by this statement." Sang Sang said, "Or is it because I also live in the academy for a long time?" Ning Ke looked at the green Mogan Mountain in the distance and said nothing. There was a quiet lake on the mountainside of Mogan Mountain, not far from the capital. It was said that when the sage of calligrapher studied calligraphy in his childhood, he used to wash his brush with the lake water. After a few years, the lake was dyed black by the brush ink. Therefore, this lake was called the brush-washing pond by the people of the Great River. There was another more famous name, which was the Black Ink Pond. Rumors were rumors after all. The lake water was still clear. The Black Ink Garden had been built many years before the sage of calligrapher was born, but it didn't affect the status of the Black Ink Garden in the people of the Great River and the cultivation world. Today, the cottage of the Black Ink Garden was very lively. Lanterns and streamers were everywhere. Before night fell, the lanterns were not lit. Those streamers and the brushes hanging in the corridors were full of literary and ink, which indicated that a happy event was approaching. Newborn green lotuses were floating on the surface of the Black Ink Pond. They swayed gently in the breeze and looked so young. Catgirl sat by the lake and looked at those green lotuses. She frowned and looked very aggrieved. Zhuozhihua walked behind her younger sister and asked with concern, "What are you thinking about?" Catgirl saw it was her senior sister and sadly leaned into her arms. After a long silence, she asked, "Senior sister, what do you think about love?" Zhuozhihua laughed and joked, "You just got engaged, but you're already thinking about the future?" Catgirl frowned and said unhappily, "Shouldn't we like each other first and then get engaged?" Zhuozhihua said helplessly, "What on earth do you want to say?" Catgirl looked at the green lotuses in the lake and the streamers in the cottage and said sadly, "I don't understand. Hill Master obviously likes Ning Quebec. Why does she want to marry the monarch? There's one more chapter. Try to finish it before 1:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 918. Zhuozhihua had been married a few years ago, but she still cultivated on Mogan Mountain. Her husband's family had no objection. Now that the monarch was going to marry the Hill Master, she was naturally the busiest one. She occasionally came to the lakeside to relax. Seeing Catgirl's sad look, she cared about her and did not expect to hear such a sentence. The past between Mo Shanshan and Ning Ke had long been known to the world, and it was once a story that the cultivation world expected to see. In people's eyes, Mr. 13 of the Academy and the calligraphy addict were undoubtedly a match made in heaven. Who could have thought that this love would end in vain? Thinking of this, Zhuozhihua inevitably felt a little depressed. She forced a smile and said, "What's wrong with marrying the monarch? In the future, the Hill Master will be the empress. She doesn't need to live in the palace and will spend most of her time on the mountain every year. You can often see her. Don't be sad." Catgirl looked at her and said, Senior sister, you know that's not why I'm sad. I just feel sad. The Hill Master obviously likes Ning Quebec. Why doesn't he like her? Zhuijihua sighed and shook her head. She did not know how to explain these complicated things to her. In the hut on the cliff side of the Ink Lake, Emo Shanshan sat by the window and calmly wrote regular script. She was still wearing that white dress, and her waterfall-like black hair was combed into a simple and refreshing bun. Her skin was naturally fair without any makeup, and her thin red lips were as beautiful as ever. But no matter how one looked at her, she did not look like a bride who was about to get married. With a soft squeak, the wooden door was pushed open, and a man in a black gown walked in slowly. The man had silver hair. Because of his age, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes were deep, but his eyes were still bright. He was tall and straight, as if he was still very young. He was the legendary master of calligrapher, Mr. Wang. To be called a sage in the world, he must be extremely extraordinary, such as the sage of sword, Liu Bai. The master of calligrapher was the most famous calligrapher in the world, and also the most famous divine talisman master. To the Great River Kingdom, he was the most powerful protector, as Liu Bai was to the South Jin Kingdom. His status was extremely respected, and even the monarch had to bow to him as a disciple. Hearing the voice, Emo Shanshan stood up from the table and saluted her teacher calmly. Then, she sat back down and dipped her brush into the inkstone. She continued to focus on practicing her wrist with the help of the sunlight outside the window. The master of calligraphy walked behind her and looked at the elegant and magnificent handwriting on the paper. He found that she could really keep calm. He couldn't help but frown and worry a little. Don't you understand? You are my favorite student and a divine talisman master that no one dares to belittle. After my death, you will be the guardian of the Great River Kingdom. I will not deprive you of your happiness, and the monarch is not qualified to have your happiness. But you need to marry someone, and the monarch is the best choice. The sage of calligraphy looked at her and said solemnly. Emo Shanshan's right hand, which was holding the brush, paused for a moment and said, I understand. After saying this, she continued to write. Her expression was tranquil, and her strokes were natural. However, the calmer she appeared, the more worried the master of calligraphy was. His expression became more and more serious, and his voice became more and more severe. I have to remind you again, if you don't want Jingdu to be swallowed by the flood and don't want to see countless people of the Great River Kingdom die miserably, then you must die or get married quickly. The master of calligraphy looked at her beautiful side face and felt a little pain in his old heart. He forced himself to suppress the pity and reluctance and said sternly, People can't fight with heaven. There is news from the West Hill that Ning Ke has entered the Divine Hall of Light and hasn't come out. No one knows what is happening in the Divine Hall. But even if Hao Yan will eventually kill Ning Ke, she will not like to see you still alone, and her anger will be unbearable to the whole world. After saying this, the master of calligraphy turned around and was ready to leave. Emo Shanshan suddenly put the brush beside the inkstone, stood up, and looked at his back. She said calmly, Teacher, I know you like me. You have liked me since I was very young. The master of calligraphy's body trembled slightly, and then his straight back seemed a little hunched. It's a pity that I grew up too fast. You didn't expect that I would become a divine talisman master at such a young age. Yes, as you said, no one can deprive me of my happiness anymore. But I'm going to be married by you after all. In addition to pity and reluctance, you must be a little happy, right? Emo Shanshan looked very calm. Of course, I admit that what you said is right. No one knows what Hao Yan will think. The Great River Kingdom can't take this risk. I will marry you as you wish. Nonsense! The master of calligraphy shouted harshly. He flicked his sleeves and went out of the hut. He didn't know whether it was because Emo Shanshan had exposed his dark thoughts that he had hidden for many years, and he didn't know how to face her. He went down Mogan Mountain and went directly to Jingdu. He came to the palace and met the king of the Great River Kingdom to arrange the marriage. The half-open door of the hut was gently blown by the wind from the black ink lake. It was closed and open from time to time. Emo Shanshan looked at it and kept silent for a long time. Then she sat back at the table. She continued to write quietly, but her lips were slightly raised, revealing a trace of a happy smile. After so many years of silence, she finally could say what she wanted to say. She felt very happy. A moment later, Zhuozhihua and Cat Girl came into the hut. Cat Girl sat beside Mo Shan Shan, holding her sleeves, and looked at her pitifully. She said, "Hill Master, what should we do?" Mo Shan Shan suddenly remembered that many years ago in the wilderness, when she asked Ning Ke what to do, Ning Ke's answer. She didn't quite understand the joke, but she still laughed very happily at that time. "What to do? Cold?" Cat Girl asked, "Just like this?" Mo Shan Shan smiled and said, "Of course not." Cat Girl was a little happy and a little sad. She said, "Mr. 13 is a heartless guy. He'll master if you don't marry the monarch. Who else can you marry?" The more beautiful a woman was, the more difficult it was to marry. The more capable a woman was, the more difficult it was to marry. It was not only the problem of matching families, but also the problem of qualification. Mo Shan Shan was famous for her beauty. When she was a young girl, she was a master of talisman Taoism. Now she was a rare young divine talisman master in history. If she wanted to marry, she naturally didn't have too many good choices. "Why do I have to marry?" Mo Shan Shan touched Cat Girl's head dotingly and said, "It's a joke to force a divine talisman master to marry. So if you don't want to marry, remember to cultivate hard." Cat Girl thought it made sense. If the man she was engaged to was not good, she definitely wouldn't marry him. It was said that there were many generals in his family. She really should hurry to improve her state. Zhuozhihua looked at Mo Shan Shan without saying anything. Her eyebrows were full of worry. Mo Shan Shan knew what she was worried about. She said calmly, "People admire and fear Hao Ian, and I am no exception. But I've already fought with her, so what's the point of being afraid of her? If Hao Ian gets angry because of me, it's not my responsibility, but her sin." The winter maple of Luoming Mountain in the capital city of the Great River was a very famous scenery in the whole world. If it weren't for the imminent wedding of the monarch and the strict security of the imperial city, there would be a lot of tourists here. The imperial road in front of the imperial city was covered with a thin layer of red leaves. Sang Sang walked on the road, and the soles of her shoes crushed the withered red leaves blown by the wind, making a very clear sound, which made people's hearts palpitate. She had changed a lot since she left the West Hill Divine Palace. For example, under Ning Ke's strong request, she put on shoes and did not put her hands behind her back at this time. Sang Sang was holding a bowl of fish balls with soup in her left hand and a bamboo stick in her right hand. She was eating without stopping. Although her expression was still so indifferent, it could be seen that she was very satisfied from the speed at which the fish balls disappeared. The imperial red leaves were obviously not as attractive to her as the fish balls. She didn't feel sorry for the red leaves crushed by her shoes like those young girls. When she walked to the main gate of the imperial city, she just finished the fish balls in the bowl and handed it behind her. Ning Ke led the big black horse behind her and hurriedly took the bowl from her. His actions were very familiar. He had long been used to his identity as a manservant along the way. "What are you going to choose?" Song Song's lips were slightly red because of the hot fish balls, which looked a little cute. Should he choose to destroy the marriage between the monarch of the Great River Kingdom and Mo Shan Shan to prove that he loved her, and then prove that there was no true love, and finally prove that he didn't love Sang Sang? Or should he choose to do nothing and watch Shan Shan marry that monarch to prove that he didn't love her, and then prove that love existed? Should he and Sang Sang stay together like this? Why do I have to make such a difficult choice? Ning Ke said, "You know that the Academy pursues freedom. Not choosing is also a kind of freedom. As I said outside the city, human beings are indeed very hypocritical." Sang Sang looked at him and said, "You should be very clear why she wants to marry." Ning Ke was indeed very clear why Shan Shan suddenly wanted to marry the monarch. It was because of the story between him and her, and because the woman beside him was Hao Ian. Sang Sang said, "Should I bear the responsibility of forcing her to marry?" Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I won't make such an idiotic judgment. Sang Sang said. Then who should bear the responsibility? Ning Ke pointed at his nose and said, Me, but I don't know what to do. Sang Sang said, Let me give you an idea. As long as you kill that monarch, she naturally can't marry. Ning Ke looked at the gate of the imperial palace and said after a moment of silence, It does sound like a good idea. Sang Sang asked, Then why are you still hesitating? Ning Ke looked at her and said, I am worried that you will leave me after I go in. Hearing this, Sang Sang became quiet. Ning Ke said again, Your logic is too rigid, so I can't do anything. Sang Sang looked down at the tip of her shoes that was exposed from the front of her indigo dress. Ning Ke said, Or why don't you help me? She looked up at him and said seriously, Men are really cheap. Ning Ke said, Just let me be cheap until I die. Sang Sang said, I can't kill you for now, so I can only watch you continue to be cheap. Ning Ke swore, From now on, I will only be cheap for you to see. Sang Sang said, Why should I help you solve this problem of choice? Ning Ke said confidently, You set the problem. I can't solve it, so you have to give me the answer. Sang Sang said, Are all human beings like you? Ning Ke said in surprise, You have slept in the same bed with me for so many years, and you still don't know that I am a weirdo? San San's heart was a little confused. She felt that this matter was a little messy. Ning Ke said at last, The cosmetics of Chinjinji Cosmetic Store are all in the Imperial Palace now. Sang Sang thought about it and found that this was indeed a problem. She walked toward the Imperial Palace and put her hands behind her back again. Ning Ke led the big black horse and followed her obediently. Then he began to secretly smile. 2 chapters on the first day. The rhythm of writing is indeed wrong, just like what the couple is going to do now. What rhythm is this? Oh, haha. As for Shan Shan's teacher's opinion of her, when Ning Ke mentioned the master of calligrapher in the wilderness, her expression was a little unnatural. That was the prologue. I originally wanted to explain it in detail in the story, but then I thought it was unnecessary and saved some words. Anyway, it is just a small episode. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 919. Ning Ke always felt that there was something wrong with letting his woman ruin another woman's marriage. And that woman liked him, but he was not going to oppose it. Sang Sang walked to the front of the palace and looked around casually with her hands behind her back, like an ordinary tourist. In the eyes of the palace guards, it was a great disrespect to the monarch. The guards scolded her and were about to drive her and Ning Ke away with the big black horse. If it were not for the approaching wedding, the guards would have drawn their swords. Sang Sang did not seem to see the guards. She looked up at a flower tree in the corner of the imperial city and felt it was a little strange. She continued to walk forward and soon approached the gate of the palace. She walked slowly into the palace in front of the palace guards. If she was not an idiot, then she must be a real powerhouse who had evil intentions towards the palace. The situation in the field suddenly became tense. Accompanied by the sound of friction, the guards all drew their swords from their sheaths. The elegant swords, which had the distinct characteristics of the great river, reflected the clear light from the winter sky and looked very much like snow trees. At the same time, the crossbowmen on top of the imperial city also aimed downwards. Ning Ke was not worried about Sang Sang's safety. He was just a little worried that too many ordinary people would die in front of her. The Great River and the Tang Empire had been good friends for generations. As a Tang, he could not let things get too bloody. He walked forward with the big black horse and told a guard that the academy had come to visit. He thought that the reputation of the academy could let him enter the palace easily, but he did not expect that he did not have an identity card and left his waist token in the West Hill Divine Palace. How could the guards believe him? Countless sharp long swords cut through the cool wind and slashed at their heads. Sang Sang knew what Ning Ke was thinking, but she did not care at all. She continued to walk forward with her hands behind her back. The slender long sword fell on her shoulder. The guards of the Great River Kingdom were more prudent and did not want to kill it first, so the guard was lucky not to die. The wind in Jingdo was very gentle, which was why there were thousands of blooming flowers and trees, and why the red leaves on the imperial road would cover and not leave. Suddenly, the wind became heavy. The wind was almost invisible. Even if it was heavy, how heavy could it be? Sang Sang walked forward calmly with her hands behind her back. The wind around her was as calm as the expression on her face, as heavy as the Peach Mountain. The long sword pierced through the wind and arrived in front of her. It was as if it had sunk into a bottomless swamp, or as if it had been swept into a raging ocean. It was impossible for it to continue descending and could only drift away. The guard looked at his palm in shock, not understanding what had happened. The same thing happened to all the guards. The swords in their hands became like rootless duckweeds in the water, blown away by the wind and waves. There was an exclamation in front of the great River Kingdom's palace. The arrows on the city wall were finally fired. However, they could not touch Sang Sang's clothes and disappeared in the wind. The people of Jingdo chased after the Tang style, and their temperaments were also very similar. The guards had already guessed that this tall, fat, and ordinary woman must be a cultivator with a very high cultivation. Even though they had no weapons in their hands, they still bravely leapt toward her, wanting to use their own bodies to block her outside the palace. However, she was Hao Yin. Even Liu Bai's sword could not enter her world. How could these ordinary people, who were like ants, do it? Shadows flew and fell like rain. Muffled groans were heard. Sang Sang looked calm and continued to walk forward with her hands behind her back. When she arrived at the imperial palace, the palace gate opened naturally. Ning Ke led the big black horse and followed behind her, quietly watching the scene. Although the difference in strength between the two sides was too great, and it could not even be called a battle, and Sang Sang did not really fight, he still wanted to find what he was looking for from these scenes. Sang Sang was the rule. She could not change the rule, but her use of the rule was in a state that no human could reach. The magic of using the rule depended on one's mind. The wind in Jingdo, the flowering trees in the corner of the imperial palace, the fishball soup in her hands, the streams and rivers she passed, everything in nature would become her weapon if she wanted to. The imperial palace opened, and Sang Sang walked in calmly. The guards and royal guards of the great River Kingdom were shocked speechless, but they could not stop her. Their eyes were filled with despair and confusion. The most powerful force in the secular world was meaningless in front of her. In her eyes, there was no difference between the imperial palace and the brothel. When she wanted to walk around, she could naturally enter. Ning Ke led the big black horse and followed behind her. It was a very wonderful feeling. He had felt this feeling when he was near the snow cliff in the wilderness. It was the loneliness of the youngest uncle, who was invincible. He had also felt it from his master. It was the confidence of the world's teacher. Back at the Right to Light in the Peach Mountain, he also had this feeling. That was because her power was in his body. Now, it was because he was walking behind her. This feeling was called invincibility. His invincibility came from her, but he did not feel ashamed because they were husband and wife. What was hers was his, and her invincibility was his. Who dare to say otherwise? The imperial palace of the great River Kingdom was very beautiful. Between the black eaves and the wooden halls, there were countless flowering trees, just like the streets of Jingdo. The bluestone slabs in front of the hall were full of traces of wind and rain. There was a fresh beauty in the vicissitudes of life. Ning Ke led the big black horse to the front of the main hall. He looked at the palaces and sighed silently. Suddenly, he found that Sang Sang had disappeared. No matter how he looked, he could not find her. Controlling the direction of the wind to form countless tiny mirrors could change the trajectory of countless rays of light. Naturally, the figure in the wind could not be seen by anyone. It sounded simple, but in fact, no one could do it except Sang Sang. Just the calculation alone could make Fourth Brother's hair turn white overnight. Ning Ke knew that Sang Sang did not leave. He thought that she was walking casually in a side palace. He did not know what she was looking at, but he was a little flustered because he could not see her. Countless guards and soldiers were rushing toward him from every corner of the imperial palace. The dark mass was extremely terrifying. He stood in front of the hall alone and had to face it alone. Ning Ke was silent and understood what Sang Sang meant. He did not want to see Shan Shan get married, but he was more afraid that Sang Sang would be disappointed. So he was shamelessly silent like many men in the world. He refused to answer Song Song's question and put the blame on her. She took him into the great river palace and then disappeared without a trace. Now, it was him standing in front of the hall and walking into the palace. It was his own choice. He looked up at the quiet and solemn palace in front of him. He pulled out the heavy iron cutlass from the sheath, held the reins, and walked slowly and firmly toward that place. The master of calligraphy's hair was very white and meticulously combed. It looked like the famous silver thread weaver of the Yueluan kingdom, which was very consistent with his image in the hearts of the great river kingdom's people. There was also a middle-aged man in the hall. He was dressed in a royal robe, and his face was unhealthily pale. His eyes were calm, but the joy and uneasiness in the deepest part of his eyes seemed to be a little entangled. He was the king of the great river kingdom. He looked at the master of calligraphy and said, "Why don't we consider this matter at length?" The master of calligraphy said, "Your Majesty, rest assured, as long as she doesn't object, no one will." The king of the great river kingdom frowned slightly and thought that the news from the black ink garden was not so. Although the hill master didn't object, it seemed that she didn't want to marry him. The master of calligraphy looked at his expression and knew what he was thinking. He said indifferently, "Even if she objects, it doesn't matter. She's a teacher and a father. I can make the decision for her." The king of the great river kingdom said, "I have admired the hill master for many years, but the Tang Empire—" The master of calligraphy was a little unhappy and said, "Why should the academy care? Did Ning Ke send the marriage certificate? The Tang Empire and the great river kingdom have been friends for many years. No matter how unreasonable they can't be unreasonable to us." The king of the great river kingdom was a little uneasy and said, "But Mr. First of the academy, the bigwigs in the cultivation world and the secular world had long known that the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, and Mr. First of the academy were sworn siblings. If not for this relationship, Mo Shanshan would have helped the academy to fight against the Abidine in Chang'an. The great river kingdom would have been wiped out by the West Hill Divine Palace." The master of calligraphy said in a low voice, "Now the academy can't protect itself. How can it be qualified to care about the affairs of the world?" As they were talking, there was a sudden noise outside the hall, followed by the sound of fighting. A pale eunuch entered the hall and shouted, "Your Majesty, an assassin broke into the palace." The great river kingdom had always been peaceful, and there had been no war or disaster in the capital city for many years. Now that the wedding day was approaching, an assassin suddenly broke into the palace. There must be a connection between the two. Thinking of this, the master of calligraphy's expression became a little ugly. He released his psyche power to explore the outside of the hall. As a superb divine talisman master in the world, it could be imagined how powerful his psyche power was. However, what shocked him was that he didn't sense anything. Even if it was Liu Bai who broke into the palace, it was impossible to hide his aura so perfectly, and it was impossible to avoid the perception of his psyche power. So who was the intruder today? He reached out to push the door of the hall and walked out of the threshold. Looking at the young man holding the big black horse in front of the hall, his expression suddenly changed. Besides shock, there was more confusion on his face. "Ning Ke, shouldn't you be in the Divine Hall of Light?" Ning Ke looked at the silver-haired old man and guessed his identity. He answered with a smile, "I can't live in the West Hill all my life. I came out to travel and pass by the great river kingdom, so I came to pay my respects to the master of calligraphy." The master of calligraphy slightly raised his eyebrows and said with an extremely cold expression, "I don't care how you escaped from the West Hill Divine Palace, but I don't think you broke into the palace today just to pay your respects." Ning Ke said, "The first sentence is naturally a lie. I'm not Hao Yin, so I can't predict that you are also in the palace. I came to the palace to meet the emperor of the great river kingdom." The master of calligraphy asked, "Why do you want to meet the emperor of the great river kingdom?" Ning Ke smiled and said, "I came to tell the emperor that his wedding with Shanshan may be postponed indefinitely." The master of calligraphy looked at him and said with a faint smile, "Even if Hao Yin will be angry?" Ning Ke sighed and said, "Looking at your disgusting expression, I know that you may have heard some rumors from under someone's wall. Unfortunately, you probably don't know that I always have the final say in my family. If I want to play today, I will only write one chapter. Tomorrow, I will write 2 chapters. I will try to get into the rhythm of writing 2 chapters or more as soon as possible. I have to write 200,000 characters this month. Thinking about it makes me cry silently. I have to learn from Master Lin Hai and this month's Master Butterfly. I will work hard. Please rest assured, if I can't write 200,000 characters this month, I will let the leaders take care of all the family affairs. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 920. Countless bodyguards and soldiers of the Great River Kingdom poured into the square in front of the temple. They were like a forest with long swords. It was a terrifying battle array, and they were about to attack Ning, Quebec. The master of calligraphy raised his right hand and motioned for the crowd to calm down. He looked at Ning K and said expressionlessly, "From what I see, the Tangs are really unreasonable." Ning K smiled and reached out his hand. "Please go ahead, Master of Calligraphy." The Master of Calligraphy frowned and said, "Since you have no feelings for my disciple, how can you interfere in her marriage?" Ning K said, "Because I know that she would never marry the monarch of your country." The Master of Calligraphy said, "Why do you say that?" Ning K said, "Eldest brother and I are the closest people to her. We know she will not marry." The Master of Calligraphy said in a low voice, "I am her teacher, and I have raised her since she was a child. Are you and Li Man, 2 outsiders closer to her than me?" Ning K spread out his hands and said, "Look, I know Shan Shan has never thought of you as the closest person to her. But you don't know. Isn't it obvious who is closer to her and who understands her better?" The Master of Calligraphy did not want to engage in such a boring argument. He flicked his sleeves and said indifferently, "I don't know how you escaped from the divine halls of West Hill, but since you have come to me, don't think about leaving." Ning K had noticed the surprised look on the Master of Calligrapher's face. Now, he knew that the divine halls of West Hill had kept the fact that he had escaped from the Peach Mountain a secret. Even the Academy did not know where he was, and no one knew that Sang Sang was with him. But after today, the whole human world should know. What really puzzled and alarmed him was the undisguised killing intent in the Master of Calligrapher's words. "What do you mean, Master of Calligraphy?" The Master of Calligraphy did not answer his question. The emotions in his eyes became more and more indifferent. He thought that killing Ning K would solve the problem for Hao Yin. He was not the Abbey Dean and did not know the complicated relationship between Ning K and Hao Yin. But as a powerhouse at the peak of knowing Destiny's state, he had an intuition about everything in the world, and his intuition was very accurate. Looking at the expression of the silver-haired elder in front of the hall, Ning K quickly figured out the reason. His body suddenly became cold, not because of fear, but because he had to calm himself down. When he suddenly heard about Shan Shan's marriage in Jingdu, he naturally had to react. However, he did not expect that it would cause such a big commotion. He could not kill the Emperor of the Great River Kingdom, as Sang Sang had said. After all, the Great River Kingdom had been on good terms with the Tang Empire for generations, and the old man in front of him was Shan Shan's teacher. However, if the old man wanted to kill him, he would not hesitate to choose the toughest counterattack. Ning K respected the old man in front of the hall, not because he was Shan Shan's teacher, but because his surname was Wang and he was respected as the Master of Calligrapher. He was a talisman Taoism master who was as famous as his teacher Yin Sei. The Master of Calligrapher was a senior and the most powerful person in the field of talisman Taoism. Of course, he had to respect him. However, any talisman master who had been immersed in talisman Taoism for a long time had his own pride, and he was no exception. Ning K did not want to die. He was very proud of his talisman Taoism. Therefore, today's battle in the palace of the Great River Kingdom was inevitable. Even if he would lose in the end, he would never give in. My teacher Yin Sei once mentioned that the Master of Calligrapher's talisman Taoism state was earth-shattering. He told me that if there was a chance to compete with the Master of Calligrapher in calligraphy and talisman Taoism, I must not miss it. Ning Ke said, "Please enlighten me, sir." The master of calligraphers said, "If Yen Sei was still alive, he might have the power to fight with me. But you can't." Ning Ke said seriously, "Sir, you are wrong." The master of calligraphers said indifferently, "What's wrong?" Ning Ke said, "Whether you're a mule or a horse, you have to come out and take a few steps." The master of calligrapher was startled by the sudden change in his tone, and then his face became extremely ugly. The bodyguards' faces were also very ugly, and the emotions in their eyes were very complicated, because they had already known Ning Ke's identity. The Great River Kingdom and the Tang Empire had been on good terms for generations. The Academy was not only the pride of the Tang Empire, but also the pride of the people of the Great River Kingdom. Of course, the Black Ink Garden was also the pride of the Great River Kingdom, especially the Hill Master. Therefore, Mr. 13 of the Academy, who had a good story with the Hill Master, naturally had a very high position in the hearts of the people of the Great River Kingdom. But today, he became an enemy. This person dared to threaten the monarch and actually came to break the marriage. Of course, the people of the Great River Kingdom were angry. But if he really did not appear, they would also feel disappointed. At this time, seeing him appear, they were angry, but also a little happy and proud. This kind of emotion was really complicated and hard to describe. Ning Ke did not know what his appearance meant to the people of the Great River Kingdom, and what kind of complex spiritual stimulation it brought to them. He looked at the master of calligrapher in front of the palace and took a step forward. At this time, there was a distance of dozens of feet between him and the master of calligrapher. Although it was just a small step forward, it meant that the battle was about to begin. The bodyguards and soldiers withdrew from the square and rushed into the main hall, protecting the monarch behind the crowd. At this moment, even the most complicated emotions turned into tension, and the palace became silent. The master of calligrapher was a super powerhouse in the world, and he had entered the knowing destiny peak many years ago. Ning Ke was also not an ordinary person. Not to mention the skills he learned in the academy, his talent in talisman Taoism was also well known in the world. If there was not a woman named Mo Shanshan in the world, he would be the world's youngest divine talisman master. There had always been a saying in the cultivation world that in the battle of the same state, a talisman master was naturally invincible. From this, it could be imagined that talisman Taoism was profound and terrifying. Then what would the battle between two divine talisman masters be like? After all, there had not been a battle between divine talisman masters in the human world for many years. The winter wind in the capital city was not cold, but only a little cool. It passed through the flowers and trees inside and outside the imperial city, came to the square in front of the palace, and came to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke solemnly raised his right arm and began to write in the wind. The character he wrote was very simple. There were only two strokes, one on top and one on bottom. They were straight and corresponded with each other, as if they would never touch, but they would also never separate. It was the first divine talisman he had mastered, the two horizontal talisman. This divine talisman was derived from Master Yen Sei's Jing Fu. Although it could not cut everything in the world like Ning Ke's Jing Fu, and even directly cut the space in the last battle with light, it perfectly matched his or the Academy's temperament, and was full of a domineering meaning. Two fierce talisman intents summoned the chi of heaven and earth, raging in the palace of the Great River Kingdom. The petals of the flowering trees in the imperial garden fell, and the twisted tree that was tied tightly by the gardener was suddenly freed. Two faintly discernible marks appeared on the bark of the tree. The marks on the surface of the copper crane in front of the palace were so deep that one could see the new copper color in the marks, and they were as bright as gold. The talisman intents fell in front of the palace and suddenly tightened, overflowing a fierce and horrible aura. Several white hairs fell in the wind, but the master of calligrapher still looked calm. He took out a pen from his sleeve and casually drew in the wind. The pen kept trembling in the wind, and the master of calligrapher's expression became extremely solemn. The sky over the capital city was originally clear, but suddenly a gust of wind roared and rolled countless dark clouds. The palace suddenly became extremely dark, and the clouds continued to roll restlessly, appearing extraordinarily violent. In the middle of the clouds, the word suppress faintly appeared. Being respected as the master of calligrapher, he was extraordinary. His cultivation of talisman Taoism was different from that of ordinary talisman masters. Besides feeling the shape of heaven and earth, he unimaginably had his own natal item. His natal item was the pen in his hand, which looked very ordinary, about the length of an ordinary person's forearm. It looked like a tool for writing big characters, but the characters he wrote in the wind were really big. Ordinary talisman masters used their psyche power as the pen and their feelings as the ink to write to nature. When nature understood them, the chi of heaven and earth would respond and turn into countless magical means. But the master of calligraphy used his natal item as the pen and the chi of heaven and earth as the ink to write wildly. He didn't need to let nature understand his meaning, because he was using his own meaning to command nature. A huge suppress word suddenly appeared in the clouds, and a wave of pressure pressed down on the imperial palace. The two sharp talisman intents released by Ning Ke suddenly became a little sluggish, and were no longer as powerful as before. Ning Ke looked at the old man riding in the wind in front of the palace, and thought that the master of calligrapher was really amazing. After the master of calligrapher wrote the word suppress, the pen was still moving. The winter wind around the palace passed the pen intent to the clouds in the sky. The dark clouds twisted restlessly again, and countless scribbled characters slowly appeared. This cloud was like a piece of paper, and the master of calligrapher was writing in the clouds. Countless extremely complex and unfathomable talisman intents fell from the clouds and attacked Ning Ke's body. Even if Liu Bai was resurrected, he would also feel a little tricky in the face of these talisman intents, because the handwriting was too sloppy and the talisman intents were constantly changing. How could he break it without knowing its meaning? Ning Ke was an exception because he was also a calligrapher and a world-famous calligrapher. He looked at the scribbled characters on the clouds and was very shocked. An endless admiration arose in his heart. What a great wild cursive script! Being able to recognize this cursive script did not mean that he could break it, because this was a great wild cursive script that vividly displayed the spirit of the calligrapher. And the most important thing was the momentum and bearing. No matter how talented Ning Ke was in talisman Taoism, he just comprehended Tao for a few years and became a divine talisman master only last year. In this respect, how could he be a match for the master of calligrapher who had been immersed in talisman Taoism for many years? If he couldn't break it with momentum and bearing, then how could he break it? What should he write? Feeling the wild grass talisman intense falling from the clouds, Ning Ke withdrew his fingers in the winter wind, held the hilt at his waist, pulled out the heavy iron cutlass, and chopped at the cloud full of characters. A knife to the left, a knife to the right. The E talisman appeared again. If he only relied on the state of talisman intent, even the most powerful E talisman of Ning Ke could not break the cursive script on the clouds. However, he did not use the talisman intent, but the original meaning of the E talisman. Ning Ke's talisman was always so simple and did not need to be written in cursive script at all. The E talisman he wrote could not be written in cursive script because the original meaning of the E character was to cut grass. Many people thought that the E character was used to describe killing people like cutting grass, but in fact, it was just an extension of the meaning of the character. At the beginning of the creation of characters, the E character was a knife used to cut grass in the field. You wrote a great wild cursive script on the clouds. Then I have to cut you twice. Hee, there is one more chapter before 12 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 9:21. The grass and trees on the cloud were messy. Some were lush and leafy, while others were pale like the autumn grass under the white frost. They were all scribbled words that were meant to kill. When the talisman that Ning Ke had cut with his blade floated up, countless thin marks appeared in the air. The cursive script on the cloud suddenly became messy. Ninkei's method was really amazing. Even the master of calligraphy admired Master Yin Sei's vision when he saw this scene. Of course, he admired Yin Sei, not Ning Quebec. The master of calligraphy shouted in front of the hall. The cold winter wind suddenly became stronger, and more clouds were swept here by the wind. After the clouds covered the sun, the imperial palace became more quiet. Clouds were very strange things. When they were few, they were just white clouds floating in the clear blue sky. When they were many and overlapped with each other, the color would become darker and darker. The clouds above the imperial palace became thicker and thicker, turning into gloomy dark clouds. As the cloud floated, it looked like the ink in the inkstone was constantly stirred by an invisible pen. The previous white paper became the ink in the inkstone, and the fierce and messy cursive writing naturally disappeared. However, the next moment, the clouds suddenly became lower, and then countless messy ink-like clouds flew out. Each messy cloud was a scribbled word. The master of calligraphy's cursive writing did not disappear. Instead, the marks on the cloud paper turned into clouds of ink, as if they had substantial energy, and fell on Ning Kei's head like rain. One amazing method! Ning Kei's face was slightly pale, and the psyche power in his sense of perception was desperately outputting. He waved the iron cutlass in front of him and wrote talismans one after another, cutting the cursive writing formed by the ink clouds into dry branches. However, this dark cloud covered the entire imperial palace, and there were at least hundreds of cursive writing hidden in it. If they kept falling like this, how long could he cut them? The iron cutlass broke the wind, and the talisman cut the grass silently. Those scribbled but horribly powerful words were cut up like real grass. The cursive writing falling from the ink clouds became denser and denser, as if it was endless. Ning Kei's face became paler and paler, and he could only struggle with the talisman around him. On the battlefield, the only thing that could restrain the power of talisman Taoism was the psyche power. A powerful talisman, like the talisman of consumed an unimaginable amount of psyche power. If not, only a few divine talisman masters could sweep across the world. For Ning Kei, he rarely felt the importance of psyche power when he cast talismans in the past. That was because he had been meditating since he was a child, almost painstakingly, so the amount of psyche power he had completely surpassed that of ordinary talisman masters. When he really needed to write countless divine talismans, such as when he fought against the heroes at the Right to Light, or when he fought against the Abbey Dean in Chong, and he had an endless source of psyche power, the God-stunning array and Song Song's divine power. Today's situation was different. Facing the master of calligrapher, whose state was unfathomable, he had to exert all his strength. However, without the help of Chong and City, after writing the 70 talismans, he felt that his psyche power was about to run out. When Master Yin Sei taught him talisman Taoism, he naturally explained this to him. Ning Kei was very clear that it was very common for talisman masters to run out of psyche power, and it was also the most common way to die. What really shocked him was that he would run out of psyche power after writing the 70 talismans. But his opponent's expression didn't change after writing the hundreds of characters in the clouds. Ning Kei rarely met a cultivator whose psyche power was more powerful than his. At this moment, he found that his opponent's psyche power was so terrifying that it seemed to be even more powerful than that of the nation master of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. The master of calligrapher was indeed the master of calligrapher. His state and means were indeed top-notch in the world today. Ning Kei knew that he had to make a decision as soon as possible. He stabbed the iron cutlass in his hand into the bluestone ground and took out the bow and arrow from the back of the big black horse while the talisman around him was still resisting the ink cursive script falling from the clouds. He pulled the iron bow and put the iron arrow on it, pointing at the master of calligrapher who was above the stone steps in front of the hall. No matter how powerful your psyche power was, no matter how terrifying the cursive script in the clouds was, what could you do when I shot you through with an arrow? At this moment, The inky clouds were flying, and the talisman intent was shaking the heaven and earth. No one could see the scene clearly, but the master of calligrapher saw Ning Kei's movements clearly. Looking at the iron bow that shook the world, the master of calligrapher's expression was as calm as before, without any fear or vigilance. Since he wanted to kill Ning Kei, how could he not think of this person's most powerful means? With a slight flick of his sleeve, the master of calligrapher reached out his right hand from his sleeve and grabbed the air. He actually grabbed a mass of inky clouds from the dark sky and sprinkled it toward Ning Kei. A big splash of ink. This was the great river kingdom, the home field of the master of calligrapher. How could he allow Ning Kei to be so presumptuous? With the movement of the master of calligrapher grabbing the cloud and splashing the ink, more than 10 palaces and countless stone and bronze statues suddenly emitted countless solemn auras. This was the big tactical array of the Imperial Palace. The tactical array in the Imperial Palace of the Great River Kingdom was the big talisman written by the Grandmasters of the Black Ink Garden. Today, the master of calligrapher grabbed the cloud as ink and moved the palace as talisman, intending to suppress Ning Kei on the spot. It was dark in front of the palace, and there was a faint shrill sound. All the sight was blocked by the inky clouds splashed by the master of calligrapher, and even the space was distorted by the chaotic talisman intent in the inky clouds. Ning Kei's iron arrow had left the bowstring, but no one knew where it went. This was the most effective way to deal with the primordial 13 arrows. If you couldn't aim, if the space you saw was fake or distorted, how could you shoot the target? Looking at the inky clouds in front of him and feeling the countless chaotic talisman intent hidden in it, Ning Kei's expression became a little complicated. He knew that he had lost, and he had nothing to say. The master of calligrapher was the sage of books. Master Yin Sei and Wei Guangming died together in the north of Chong and city, so he was the only talisman Taoism master in the world. It would take time for Ning Kei to catch up with his state. Ning Kei was about to be killed by the talisman intent in the inky clouds, but strangely, there was no fear on his face. He looked very calm, but a little disappointed. The master of calligrapher looked at the expression on his face and frowned slightly. He was a little puzzled. Ning Kei had experienced countless dangerous battles in his life, but the only fair battle he had with a real powerhouse was the battle with Xiaoho on the Snow Lake and the battle with the Abbey Dean in Chong and city. In the battle with Xiaoho, Xiaoho had not recovered from his injury. In the battle with the Abbey Dean, the entire Chong and city and the people in the city were his helpers. Logically speaking, the battle with the master of calligrapher today should be the most dangerous one. His opponent was really powerful, so powerful that he could grab the inky clouds and use miraculous means. Ning Kei was bound to lose, but he still thought it was the easiest battle in his life. He put down the iron bow that had lost its meaning and drew out the heavy iron cutlass from the bluestone. His right foot stepped heavily on the ground, and 4 connected bluestones were smashed. Then he suddenly jumped up and rushed toward the master of calligrapher. The great spirit in his abdomen completely broke out, and endless power poured into every part of his body, increasing his speed to an unimaginable level. Ning Kei rushed into the inky fog. In the dark fog, there were countless scribbled words and the chaotic talisman intent in the ink. The air in the fog had been twisted. The Great Spirit covered every inch of his skin, but it was still not enough to completely isolate the horrifying talisman intent. His clothes were torn, and his body was cut open. Blood flowed out and was broken into fog. Ning Kei continued to run with the faint blood fog, and he waved his cutlass to cut the big inky. Every time the cutlass fell, the inky was cut a little bit, and a clear cut would appear on the gray clouds above the palace, revealing the clear blue sky, which was still clear and boundless. The master of calligrapher slowly raised his eyebrows, and his white hair, which had been messed up by Ning Kei's divine talisman, danced in the wind. He knew that Ning Kei had cultivated the Great Spirit and had joined the devil, but he still felt that Ning Kei was courting death. That was because the space in the big ink was already distorted. Not to mention Ning Kei. Even if Ku Howren came back to life, He would not be able to rush over with a sword, because space represented the power of rules. He felt that Ning Ke was courting death, so he decided to send Ning Ke on his way. A strong psyche power shrouded the whole palace, and the area of the Inky spread further and further. The dark fog filled the square in front of the palace, and even the flower tree in the corner of the palace was gradually covered. Ning Ke rushed into the Inky, and countless crisp sounds rang out. It was the sound of the winter wind being driven by his body, and then being cut off by the twisted space and the chaotic talisman intent in the Inky. Even the wind could be cut off, not to mention the cutlass, let alone a human being. The flower tree in the corner of the palace wall had several superfluous branches falling, which did not seem to be able to withstand the talisman intent. Ning Ke continued to run, completely ignoring the horrifying inky fog. Then, he ran out of the fog and appeared in front of the master of calligraphy. The twisted space and the chaotic talisman intent in the fog did not kill him. Except for the clothes that were cut at the beginning and the small wound, there was not even a new wound on his body. The flower tree in the corner of the palace wall was safe and sound. The master of calligraphy looked at Ning Ke, who came in front of him, frowned slightly, and remained silent. He felt that this matter was very puzzling and unreasonable. Although the Tangs were indeed unreasonable, and the Academy was even more famous for that. But this matter was really too unreasonable. Ning Ke was not going to reason anymore. In the previous conversation, the master of calligraphy had said that the Tangs were unreasonable, and he had already asked the master of calligraphy to explain it. So there was no need to repeat it at this time. He raised the heavy iron cutlass and chopped at the master of calligraphy. If Ning Ke held the iron cutlass within 1 foot of him, who in the world could be his opponent except for the powerhouses of the Enlightenment doctrine and Yi Hongyu? The master of calligraphy roared and raised the brush in front of him. The brush broke. The master of calligraphy was shaken and hit the pillar of the main hall, spitting out a lot of blood. He was the master of calligraphy, not the master of sword. In an extremely short period of time, the sage of calligraphy had aged a lot. He looked at the broken brush in his hand with a perplexed expression because he still didn't understand. He was very confident in his state of talisman Taoism. He believed that even in the battle before Yin Sei's death, his state was similar to his. Then why could his disciple beat him? Why could Ning Ke ignore his splashing ink? He looked at Ning Ke and asked why. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Probably because you can't beat me." The master of calligraphy did not understand and continued to ask, "Why can't I beat you?" At this time, a voice came from the side of the hall. This voice had no emotion, but everyone who heard it had to believe it, because the speaker seemed to take it for granted, and her words were the law. "Because I don't want you to beat him." Sang walked to the front of the hall with her hands clasped behind her back. She did not even look at the master of calligraphy, who was lying in a pool of blood. She looked up at the dark clouds in the sky and said, "Collecting clouds is good, but the clouds are a little dirty. Yesterday, Yin Kai helped me calculate the accounts. If I need 200,000 this month, I will have to write an average of 7,200 words a day from today onwards." He is deeply worried about this. I am not worried because I have decided to work hard together with the students who are taking part in the college entrance examination. We will definitely succeed. Here, I wish all the students participating in the college entrance examination all the best. Then, as I repeat every year in June, I sincerely hope that you can't see what I'm saying, because it means that you're not playing online. Lastly, my sang is so cute. I'll also write 2 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.